Steve Aiken, Jim Allister, and no other apologies have been received that I'm aware of. Is that correct? Yep. Okay, Jim Allister has delegated his vote to Jim Wells. Matthew will run a little bit late, and Gemma may have to step out and will delegate her vote to Melissa. Okay?
Also, Philip will have to probably leave us, and he's delegated his vote to Melissa as well.
Okay.
Vote early, vote often.
Okay, declaration of interests. All members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests at each committee meeting as applicable. Have members any relevant interest to declare for this session? No?
I'm a member of the GAA.
Okay.
Mr. Foster.
And so as
well, sorry.
I would be a block booker at Windsor Park.
Okay.
Okay. That's Melissa. Thank you.
And sorry, I should also say I'm a member of Cycling Ireland. I'm not sure that's relevant. But
Okay. Thank you for that, members. Members are asked to note at page 6 a written briefing on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Coronavirus Bill. Do members have any questions for the clerk on the information provided?
Chairperson, also to advise members, in tabled items you can see a letter from the Fiscal Council who have responded to committee's queries about the bill, and they've commented on the numbers that the department had come up with. Okay.
So if we can add now the witnesses to the spotlight, please. Okay. The committee will now receive oral evidence from Colin Neal, Hospitality Ulster, and Janice Galt, Northern Ireland Hotels Federation, on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. This session will be reported by Hansard. Colin and Janice, you're very welcome. I take it you can hear me okay, yes? If you just nod or wave or something, yeah? Okay, thank you very much. You're both very welcome to the Committee for Finance. We've invited you to the meeting in order to hear your views on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The bill will remove largely anything which relates to the pandemic as the basis of the appeals in respect of business rates valuations, and this will be backdated to the 1st of April 2020. Please take the next 15 minutes or so between you to tell us what you would like or what you like or dislike about the bill. Perhaps you could tell us how you would like to see it amended, or how you might like to see any supporting finance from the department spent. Shall we begin with Mr. Neal, if you don't mind, and then Ms. Galt, if that's okay, unless you've some other. Happy enough, Colin?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll keep it brief, I suppose. Look, I realise similar bills have passed in other jurisdictions within the United Kingdom, and I appreciate that government needs to secure its income from the rate space to protect its income. I suppose where we run aground in that is who is protecting hospitality industry's income. We have done and will likely continue to see a huge drop in revenue streams, and then to be expected to pay full rates. Very briefly, I would like to see added a fund set aside as part of this bill that actually is there to support industries, targeted support for industries that are particularly impacted by COVID. And I would say the hospitality industry has been, is and will be that industry.
Okay, Colin, thank you. Janice?
Sorry, apologies, Chair, just getting the mute button off there. Okay. The points that Colin makes are well made, and we look back to Reval 2020, when of the 145 hotels that were on the register, 113 of them received a massive increase in their NAV. Our concern is that if this is put forward, what is actually a coronavirus mitigation, and will it stop anybody appealing in the short term? Our bigger worry is that we are now going into 2022, 2023 with a large degree of uncertainty, and an amendment to it could be that there is an agreed scale of discounts offered to people who can demonstrate that they have been adversely affected over the last 2 to 3 years. From our point of view, we're sitting at the moment like drop 30 percentage points on our normal occupancy figures. That doesn't take into account other income streams that have been taken away. It is a little bit worrying to read back on previous evidence of the suggestion that even with consultation, the same decision would have been reached. It's a very concerning thing for us that we've already have a predetermined position on this particular issue. Except that a large amount of people may feel the need to appeal their NAV. Surely the way to look at this now for 2023 is an exceptional year. The view to
Janice,
2020.
Janice,
Well, 2023, yeah.
Janice, can I interrupt you if you don't mind? With a bad connection, do you mind turning off your video just to see if it improves? At least we can hear you if you don't mind doing that. We'll try and persevere
Can
with
you
that
hear
if
me
you don't
better?
mind. Yeah.
Can you hear me better now?
Yep, go ahead, that's fine, thanks.
From our point of view, we would like to see there will be a reval in 2023, and that will give people the opportunity to address things under a fair and sustainable principle. And we think that would be a much better way of doing it. We understand that the Finance Minister has tasked the University of Ulster Economic Policy Unit to look at the effects on our industry, but we think it would be better and there would be a lot more comfort for the sector if this was dealt with prior to or as part of the passing of the bill.
Okay. Just I have a couple of questions and then I'll bring in Philip after that. This is calling on Janice. Am I right in saying that your sectors that you both represent did get the full 2-year rates holiday, we'll call it, as in no rates to pay until next year? Am I correct in saying that? Anybody that you represent, is that the case?
Yes, that's the case. Albeit it is worth noting that the sector has been pretty much under restrictions all of this year. If you compare it to our counterparts in GB who have actually been able to trade pretty much normally.
So
We would be,
yes.
we'd be in the same position as Colin, with all hotels being in receipt of the rates holiday, but having been closed effectively for 305 days and have had no trading without restrictions since April 2020.
So, if you I obviously don't want to know individual cases, but what's your understanding, Janice or Colin, that any individual that's appealing currently and using coronavirus as the argument, which obviously it is, what are they actually appealing to do? What's your understanding? Are they trying to appeal to reduce their NAV, or what are they appealing?
I would say from our side, it's not. There aren't appeals aren't happening now. As this legislation is obviously going to affect our rates next year when we're paying them, and that's the key area, that it will refuse any opportunity to appeal, regardless of what state we come out of this year in, and also what state we're going in next year. And remember, the important thing to remember is pubs and hotels rates are based on their turnover to work out a rental value, and the turnover figures will not represent what's capable of doing.
I understand the same as Colin. It'll be the 2022-2023 NAV that people want to appeal against. So that's why we say, would it not be better agreeing a sort of a scale of payment that we could have for the coming year, instead of having to deal with a raft of appeals? The other point to make in relation to the turnover is standing it aside, there's a considerable increase in the level of costs, which the current rating system won't take into consideration. So if we are dealing under the restrictions that we currently have and the restrictions that we've had in the past, your actual cost of doing business, you're doing less business and you're doing it at a much higher cost. So for us, it really is the coming year, and the fact that then, if you, for example, this was to continue after Reval 2023, it may require us, we would not be able to actually appeal for 2023, 2024 onwards, which seems slightly strange in that the rateable value is based on, what the business is going to be what the business would be rented for in normal circumstances. And if there is a decimation of certain areas, therefore the rent would automatically fall, and COVID would be the reason for that. We would also query really what isn't a COVID effect. I don't think it's, you could put it down as something completely different. It'll be in the semantics of it. And that's one of the real concerns about the wording of this bill.
So am I right in taking up what you're both saying, Colin and Janice, that you're not so much concerned about from today back, it's going forward ultimately? Am I correct in saying that? So if this bill,
yes.
If this bill came into being, that effectively your sector would not be fit to appeal based on it. So you're not so much concerned about today working back, it's going forward that period of time, and in the future.
Yes.
And in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, that's me for now. I'll bring in Philip, if you don't mind, Philip.
Thank you. Chair, you actually covered one of the points that I was going to make. I mean, Colin, just in his evidence, he talked about the necessity of some kind of support fund should this legislation come in. So, I mean, the Minister has said, I presume Colin and Janice are aware, that if the bill does pass, there will be a 50 million fund coming this way as a result of the Barnett consequential, which, you know, the Minister has said will be made available and will be ring-fenced in terms of supporting businesses. So, I mean, is that what Colin was, I mean, I take it that's what Colin was indicating was necessary, and how, I mean, if I could ask both of them, how vital a fund like that would be in terms of supporting businesses?
I think if I come in here, look, it is a fund similar to that, but we haven't seen the criteria or how that would be targeted. Obviously, 50 million spread across any business that has seen any impact would pretty much run out very quickly, because every sector has. I think we need to see something bespoke for hospitality, given that, say, we have traded under severe restrictions. We're still trading under new restrictions that started last Monday on the proof of access for COVID. So I think it's really important. What we need to see in there is a bespoke targeted with terms of reference, not just there's 50 million and we'll use that if somebody gets in trouble during COVID.
There are 74,000 businesses in the rates thing, so £50 million is a large sum at the moment, but as Colin says, without actually working out where we are. And I think for a lot of businesses who are very concerned about the coming year, rates is one of their biggest bills, and they would like to have seen this pinned down before this particular bill was brought forward. For us, it is very much about going forward and where we find ourselves. We could be in a position where we're damaged by this for a number of years to come. And it is important that businesses are allowed to remain sustainable and viable, and that the burden of rates is addressed in an efficient manner. And it would have been maybe a good idea to see how this money is going to be spent, what the criterion are, and what the sectors are that will be able to benefit from it.
I think, if I may come in and add there too, we have pointed out to the Department of Finance that our counterparts in England will see a 50% rates reduction next year, and there's been a Barnett consequential of that. It was pointed out to us that unlike them, we have had 100% rate relief this year where they didn't. But that said, they have been trading all year, or pretty much all year, without restrictions. We haven't, is the big difference.
I mean, just to clear that up, so, I mean, essentially businesses here haven't been paying rates for the past 2 years, where that hasn't been the case across the water. And am I right in saying that the business grants have been more generous here than they were perhaps maybe in the likes of England?
Yes, that is correct. But again, I would make the case that our restrictions have been also more severe, lasted much longer. Indeed, I mean, the like of our nightclubs have spent months upon months without any assistance when all the grants ended here, and have been closed effectively. They've only now been open for a matter of weeks.
I think it's important that we just point out that this is an issue specific to rates, because it's an issue specific for the Department of Finance. Ongoing business support, which I would like to see as a matter for the Department for the Economy.
No, sorry, I would accept that. I was sort of just doing the comparison when we talk about the rates relief next year. What we get fed back to is, though you've had more rates relief this year.
Yep, sound. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, Philip. Yep. Jim?
Colin, you're the voice of the sector. You're Nolan more times than I am, and that's saying something. So I heard you on this morning yet again on the media, and that's your role. But do you accept that the Department of Finance and the Department of the Economy were exceptionally generous in their support for small business, including hospitality, over this last 19 months?
Absolutely, totally 100%, and it has been really welcome. It has saved thousands of jobs and thousands of business and tens of thousands of jobs.
Because that's how businesses that I've dealt with in South Down have said to me that they found both departments to be very flexible, approachable, and delivered enough to keep their heads above water. So therefore, having had complete rate relief for all of your members over this last 2 financial years, are the department being unreasonable in saying that you can't then use existing legislation to appeal the valuation on the basis of coronavirus?
I would say that COVID isn't over. The trading conditions for us are likely to be very difficult, and there is no point in giving you a lifeboat, rowing it within sight of shore and then sinking it.
Yes, I loved your line about whack-a-mole, that the only moles were the hospitality industry.
Yes.
I wish I'd thought of that line. That was a very good one. But we're in a difficult position here, and I have to say this because, this isn't black and white. Both sides have got a very clear argument here, because the department, if they give in to one of your members, a pub or a restaurant, they have to apply that right across the sector, and there's huge numbers involved. If those appeals are successful in the business of coronavirus, there's £600 million at stake here. If there's a reduction in the rateable income, then unfortunately other sectors, roads, housing, hospitals, have to suffer. So why are the department being unreasonable, particularly when they've set aside £50 million to target those who are adversely affected? I mean, I think the public will think that the department's trying its best here.
If I maybe answer that, Jim, and then let Janice come in. What we're saying is that, and I said it in my opening statement, I realise that the government need their money to do their work. But if you are a sector like hospitality who has been particularly and specifically affected by COVID, if you don't have the money to pay that bill and you can't appeal, it's not going to get paid anyway because you don't have it. You'll go bust. So government don't get their money, and you also lose a viable business and the jobs it created. And that's why I've said it's about some sort of fund, or it's about putting a time limit in this, and during that time limit saying the rates for certain sectors will be. But we need to see terms of reference if it's a fund, because we don't know if that's going to be applicable.
When did you first become aware as an organisation that this was coming your way? In Northern Ireland?
A number of weeks ago, when we got, I think it was notification, I honestly can't remember, maybe from the department, saying the intention was to be an accelerated bill.
So can you roughly, I know you've been incredibly busy this last few months, can you remember roughly when you became aware that this was on the horizon as an organisation?
I am guessing now, to be honest. I would say probably about roughly 4 weeks.
4 weeks ago. Right, but you were aware, of course, that parallel legislation was going through in the rest of the United Kingdom.
Not until this cropped up, and then I sat up and looked elsewhere.
Actually, you must be affiliated to a UK-wide organisation somewhere. You're not entirely on your own in all
Yes,
that.
we are indeed, but it didn't come up on the agenda. I meet with our UK counterparts every week.
Well, what do you think? Did you see the very interesting and very honest presentation by the Chief Executive of the Land and Property Services to the committee, where he said that he verified what you've said, that you weren't informed. You only were informed more or less at the same time that we were informed, but that there was no sense informing you because they weren't going to change their mind. How did you react to that comment?
Well, I must admit, if I'm being honest, it's why you don't have a paper in front of you, because it's very hard to write a paper when you think you're arguing on a done deal.
Do you think we as a committee and we as an assembly could find the resources to give you what you want?
I think it's a false economy if you think we'll just charge all the rates, because if people don't have the money to pay it, you don't get it. We have to be realistic on both sides. I am realistic that government want to maximise their rates because they need it to do all the good things they do. But if people can't pay it, it's an accounting exercise.
And finally, have you had any chance to consult your members as to the job and business impact if we can't meet your concerns on this issue? Have you any thoughts on what the long-term implications are for the industry? So,
as Janice says, again like ourselves, we're surveying the industry regularly. we're trading well below what we should. We have seen, like, all of the Christmas trade disappear because of messaging, if I'm being honest, and the most of it from coming out of government. That has left us, we normally take sort of a third of the year's turnover at Christmas. Without that, there's no reserve even to help pay rates and stuff when they come back. And what will trade be like next year? At the minute, it's scary.
Thank you.
Okay. Just another question, Colin and Janice, I have. Obviously, you're aware the antecedent date is the 1st of October 2020. So obviously your members will be getting notification now through, 2020, what? 2021, apologise. Antecedent date is the 1st of October 2021. Your members obviously will receive documentation for LPS to fill in, your rates, etc., etc. Sorry, not your rates, your rent value. Do you see that figure being different than the previous antecedent date, and why? You referred earlier, Colin, about your pick hospitality is based on footfall, etc. Is that? I'm not saying you're incorrect. My understanding was it was purely down to size and rental value.
No, in hospitality, we're based on what's called a profits and income receipts model, which actually takes the premises, what they buy in, what money they bring in, looks at what the theatrical profit is and divides it in two, and half of that becomes our rates. A good example, if you like, is I have a public house. I can use an example I'm allowed to use, Horatio Todd's, where if you take the 7 licensed restaurants around it that would compete, and it's a food establishment, the Horatio Todd's rates, NAV, is double the sum total of the 7. So you can see how the model throws it off significantly.
So what do you see that being, if that individual that owned that property was filling that antecedent document in today based on coronavirus, based on, let's say, the last time he or she did that, what would that figure be? What percentage roughly, Colin, if you understand where I'm coming at from?
Well, unfortunately, the period for the way that's going to be taken into account is pre-COVID. So their rates would be judged when they were actually doing, the normal trade. They will have no account for COVID whatsoever.
Okay, Janice, do you want to come in on that? Are you happy enough?
Hotels operate in a slightly different model. We take different income streams, and a percentage of those is calculated through. We would like to have had an opportunity to have a look at this year and the year before as two standalones. We actually have independent figures that we get from STR, who are a global organisation, collect our benchmarking figures. So for us, it'll be 18, 19, 19, 20 and 2021. We've pointed out that you're taking figures that are completely irrelevant. What you did in 2018 and 2019 bears no resemblance to what you're doing in 2021 and 2022. And as I've said, from our point of view, we reckon we will trade at roughly we would normally trade around 72% hotel bedroom occupancy. This year, that's slightly ticked up around 45%. We thought it might have ended up slightly higher, but the current situation has meant that business is quite considerably over the last number of weeks.
And final question from me then, with regard to your organisations, is there any particularly going to be disadvantaged by this legislation, or all of them? Is any underneath yourself, Janice, or Colin, that's going to be particularly hit by this, or is it a broad brush that all will be?
This is an equitable disadvantage to everybody. I mean, there are a considerable amount of businesses. This is a large chunk of money to be finding. And I think for them, we would have very much liked this settled before the 1st of April, so they could budget accordingly. I think they recognise and really appreciate the support that they've got, but they would like being in a position to make a meaningful contribution, but the one attributes to the difficulties that they've been through.
Okay, thank you. A couple other questions. Matthew?
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you both Colin and Janice for coming and giving us evidence. I appreciate you're doing it at relatively short notice, and you've both got a lot of other things on at the minute. Can I just understand your position? And apologies, I missed the first quarter of an hour of the session. But is your position that you think, I mean, what this bill does is obviously retrospectively change the law so that your members and other businesses cannot appeal their NAV valuations. It doesn't. It's not, as it were, asking them for any more money. But is your objection to the principle of this, or is it to the fact that the economic conditions mean that you'd rather your firms weren't having to pay full rates going forward for the next year or two? Does that? I hope I've asked that question succinctly. Is it the principle or the practice, I suppose, is the question?
I'll go first. It's both the principle and the practice.
Okay.
The principle of deciding to do this and then saying we're not necessarily going to consult because we've already worked out what the answer will be. Will that be applied in the future? Secondly, we've no idea how much longer COVID is going to go on for, so that really presents a problem. And the coming year, 2022, 2023, could be as difficult as the two previous years. So our argument would be, instead of risking the appeals, I know there's this fund of £50 million, would not be possible at this stage to put forward something in principle outlining how the monies were to be distributed for businesses of this hardship. That would really be our position at the moment. So
just so I'm understanding that, Janice, you're saying that in order to sort of soften the blow or sweeten the pill of this bill, you would like to see the Minister give clarity on how the £50 million is going to be dispersed? I think that softening and sweetening it is simply that if 30% of our normal business, our rate should be reflective of that. So therefore, that's something that would be pertinent to do at the moment in time. Okay. Our idea would be to reduce the opportunity and the necessity of people to appeal and the amount of work that will take by putting in place a framework that will encourage people and allow them to budget accordingly, therefore pay whatever the decision is, what the fund, the outline of what the fund will actually entail. That for us is the important part. Okay. Unfortunately, Janice, you're just slightly, it may be the haphazard Wi-Fi in Parliament buildings, but I think I get the gist of what you're saying is you don't like this bill, but your priority is that your members have clarity on the support and the 50 million. You'd rather this bill wasn't happening, but your particular concern is getting the clarity on the 50 million. Yes, with the clarity. Is it 50 million or is there a larger fund, or how is this going to be addressed would be our priority. Okay. Colin, sorry. Did you want to add?
Yes, please, if I can. I think our objection is actually based in reality. Whilst I totally respect that government need to raise their money, if you like, they need to protect their income. Who is protecting the income of the hospitality businesses? If you set off to take £10 from me and I've only got £5, you only get £5. So you may have a nice flow sheet that says what's coming in, but you ain't getting it if it's not there. And I think we need to have a system. One, this legislation needs to have a sunset clause, time bound, because no one can tell what the future is, and this may need revisited. But there needs to be a fund sitting but now before this bill passes, or as part of this bill, with the terms of reference. The hospitality industry has been particularly and especially hit and is continuing to be so. And we fear further restrictions. The industry is already operating below profitability and will need some assistance or some way to go back and prove that it needs that assistance. Removing any ability to prove it means then there has to be something up front.
But I mean, I suppose I don't think I can't speak for the Minister, and I'm fairly sure he wouldn't want me to. But I suppose he would say that the sunset clause is the fact there's going to be another revaluation in the next year or two, and so why what this bill does is remove one potential area for appeal. Now, obviously, it's a pretty dramatic thing they're doing, but he would say that if you're
if you're taking away, removing this one aspect of appeal and giving, from his perspective, there isn't detail on it yet, the 50 million of compensation, but you're also going to have another revaluation in the next couple of years, isn't that a sunset clause? As in, you're not saying that forever and a day this will be the NAV of premises. You're just saying that you can't appeal the one that you got in 2020.
My understanding, the reval is taking place doesn't come into effect on the 1st of April next year, when we expect to pay the rates. I think it's another year at least, if not further down the line. So by the time that reval takes effect, if you've been trying to make people pay that don't have the money, and you take them to court and they go broke, it's no use saying, well, your reval the following year would have been better.
I think the reval 2023, but it is only going to take up for a short period of the COVID actual trading times. The LPS want figures of the last year end in October 2020, which means that many people will put in 18, 19, 20 as their years, which is really only 9 months of COVID trading, where in fact we've actually had more than double. And that's part of the issue with the current NAVs. May not get an NAV that is reflective of the whole COVID position until reval maybe 2025, 2026.
Okay, thank you.
So just on that, before I bring Militia, 1 second, Janice, talking about the revaluation, if you look back at the previous reval, whenever that was, and then you got the new revaluation in April 20, what percentage did you go up as a sector, do you know, from the previous reval to the past one?
We went up from, our reval increased by about 47%.
So, okay, so
overall.
So from the previous one to the one past, 41%. So what do you anticipate, and maybe it's a guesstimate, that your reval is going to be this time around based on those two figures?
It depends on how we can try a meaningful snapshot. We need to work with the LPS to go through the actual details. When the last reval was done, there was 143 hotels, I think, in the system. Of those, 113 had a double-digit rise in their actual NAV. But if you're going to take the years 18 and 19 into account of the new reval, may see an increase again, because if your year end is, say you work on the calendar year 2021, you will not be allowed in that full year's trading into the reval. That would actually, we need to work a way around that and give meaningful figures. So the way that it actually works, it's the 3 previous years. The reval will be done, the figures will be sent out, and the calculation will be made with you printing the list. I understand some stage in late 2022 to allow people to calculate then what the rate poundage will be. But for us, that means we'll be paying a rate poundage and a rate and an NAV based on a time of thing which were in normal circumstances, not those that were affected by COVID-19.
Okay, so your line's a bit breaky, but I got the gist of that. Janice, do you want to say anything on that, Colin? Are you happy enough?
Again, I mean, because we have thousands of businesses across the spectrum in the hospitality industry, there's a mixed picture from the last reval, but we've seen increases in the 100, 200 and 300% at the extreme end and very small reductions at the other end.
Okay, Militia?
Yeah, well, just again to sort of in relation to the revaluation, like the Minister's already said that there'll be 50 million support for rates next year, and as the revaluation in itself doesn't come into effect in 2023, so really would you agree with me that there will be no impact going ahead in the following year? And like in other words, we're now 222, so there's no impact there. And you seem to have this fear like that as if that was all going to sort of happen retrospectively, and as a result of that would be an impact on hospitality. But given, as I say again, that the revaluation list doesn't come into effect in 2023, and there is 500 million available for rates next year, then there should be no.
50. If it was 500, we'd
Or
all
sorry,
go home.
50 million. Sorry, yeah.
The
50, yeah. My apologies.
Again, if I may come in there, look, I really appreciate the purpose of this bill. It is to give reassurance to the rate base to government what their income is. But that reassurance, you have to also give the reassurance to the people that have to pay it, that if they can't pay it, what support will be there or reductions in their rate bills in this period next year.
I mean, there's 74,000 businesses, and it's our question is, how is the 50 million going to, what are going to be the terms and conditions, and who is going to be able to avail of this? That's the question, which goes in tandem with the bill. If there's 74,000 businesses and it's 50 million pound calculation, that's £675 per business if it's calculated out equitably. But I would hope it would be calculated out by those that have suffered more, but we don't actually know that. And therein lies the issue.
Well, just given too that but the potential impact on public finances in the event of a £250 million loss to the executive over a 3-year period, if this bill isn't passed, this is money that is needed by councils to provide the public services. But not only that, it isn't to say that it provides the public services, the money disappears, because that's the same money that sustains local populations that in turn sustain the hospitality industry in itself. So how do you feel about that? And what other way, can we protect both public services and provide that sort of income within communities as well too, that in many ways will sustain your industry?
I think, if I may say, the bill, and I recognise and I understand the government want to protect its income and protect its services, but if the businesses cannot pay it, the government cannot collect it, and then the government is false accounting if it believes it's got that money coming.
Okay. Pat?
Hello, Colin. Pat here. How are you? It'd be remiss of me not to at least bring up something, and it all reflects on the rates and when the rates do to come in. But from the businesses that I've been talking to, they're really struggling. They're finding it very difficult. It's a case of trying to get their doors open as best they can. And I was very impressed. I went out on Thursday and Friday day to see the crowd moving back into the city of Lisburn, and also the opening of the new pub in Lisburn called the Lark. But Colin, there's a lot of fear out there. And it's only fair for me, Chair, if you let me just indulge, because what I'm trying to get to is the income, and that's where the rates bill has been paid out of. I know businesses just this weekend, have had their windows broke, all sorts of threats given to them because they asked to see a COVID certificate. Have you, and it's important to me, I read a letter off to you this morning, but are you aware of what help the Economy Department is trying to do to our businesses, your business owners, the people that make up your federation, in order to try and help them alleviate that fear? Because it's real, it's in real time, and it's happening. Meanwhile, they are being tugged at every quarter to try and keep their doors open. And I know, as you know, you can express it maybe even better than I can, that it is real life fear that they won't have a business. Can you elaborate on that, on the help that you've got? Because at the end of all of this will come the reval in the rates. And you can't take blood out of a stone.
Thank you. Look, I said earlier on here, we are really grateful for all the help and assistance that the Northern Ireland Executive and indeed Westminster have provided. It has saved thousands of businesses, and combined with the furlough has saved tens of thousands of jobs. But we are now in a period again of very little help. The rates holiday is still there, but furlough and other assistance has gone. Trading figures are plummeting. I like it to an avalanche of cancellations and footfall dropping. We're seeing now, like yourself, I have seen, and I've texted today again, of threats towards staff about trying to enforce, as we are legally required to do, the proof of COVID certification. And if I may again indulge me to say that it is strange that small independent businesses are legally required to enforce COVID rules when organisations like TransLink are not. That said, what we face at the minute is, at the end of the financial year, rental protection goes, insolvency protection goes. It is likely that VAT will go back to 20%, and it is likely, from what we can see, that rates will go back. If there isn't the money coming in, we need to trade about 75% capacity just to break even. And indeed, in this period, we need to be trading at 100 to pay the bills in just January and February. There are people desperate again. I actually would say they're now worse than they were when they were locked down previously, because at least they were locked down and the banks couldn't touch them, the landlords couldn't touch them, and they had some grants. Now they're in free fall.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, members, anybody else? Sorry, go ahead there, Philip.
Just one last point, because I think maybe it was Colin raised it, just about the difference between the 50 million and what they're doing over in England. I mean, I think it's important to say that it's not just a straight 50% relief they're getting there. It is capped. It is a capped relief, and it is also per business rather than per property in relation to over there. So I just wanted to put that on the record as well.
Okay, no other members indicated any other questions. So I want to thank Colin and Janice. Appreciate you coming along, or well, not coming along, should I say, enlightening us in information, and appreciate your answers. And thank you in the meantime, and no doubt we'll be in touch in the future. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, are there any questions for the department which members need, or we need to take forward as a committee based on that information or evidence session that we received?
Sum up at the end.
One comment question for the department is I wasn't entirely clear from that evidence session that I think they understood the basis, but I wasn't entirely clear that I got there was a kind of conflation of the specific question to do with the legislation retrospectively and support going forward, and I think that's something that the department needs to resolve in its communications.
I think we took it at the start, Matthew, or I took it certainly, that they were more concerned about from today going forward than today going back, because their members obviously haven't paid any rates, but they're talking about going forward. So, for example, they'll not be fit if this is passed, they'll not be fit to appeal it, let's say in the middle of 22.
Yeah.
It's not so much from now going back they're concerned about, it's going forward. Because,
no, I get that. Yeah.
So, well, maybe if we're happy members, we'll recap on all of these evidence sessions at the last, because there'll probably be some questions similar to the next session, if we're happy doing that. Pat?
Chair, look, I apologise for coming in a wee bit late there. You may well have went over that before, but
no, that's fair.
I just thought it was important.
No, fair enough. Okay, members, the committee will now receive oral evidence from Glyn Roberts, Retail NI, and Roger Pullen, FSB Northern Ireland, on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The session will be reported by Hansard. So we'll just wait to
just coming in.
Glenn and Robert comes in. I think they're going to be in person. So there should be no Wi-Fi problems with this session, hopefully.
I was at the High Street Task Force this morning, so he's done well to make it to here.
I think he's going to go somewhere at 4.
Show.
No, he's definitely going to be with us in 2 seconds. Hi there, just if you bear with us, we're just waiting for Mr. Roberts. Thanks, members, for all turning out. I know that it's busy in plenary, and you do get told off for not showing up for question time.
Okay. Give us a moment or two to get settled in. Mr. Roberts, Mr. Pullen, you're both very welcome to the Committee for Finance. We've invited you to the meeting in order to hear your views on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The bill will remove largely anything which relates to the pandemic as the basis of appeals in respect of business rates valuations, and this will be backdated to the 1st of April 2020. Please take the next 15 minutes or so between you telling us what you would like or what you do like or dislike about the bill. Perhaps you could tell us how you would like to see it amended, or how you might like to see anything supporting financially from the department spent. Shall we begin with you, Lynn, if you're happy enough, and then Roger? I'm sure you'll not argue who comes first, so go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I think it's appropriate at this stage to put on record our appreciation for the Finance Minister's efforts. I think 2 years of rates relief and the various grant schemes were an absolute lifeline for so many of our members, and for many of them it was. It did help them survive. And I think it's absolutely no exaggeration that it did save thousands of jobs and businesses. And I think fair play to Minister Murphy, he listened to our concerns but also acted on them as well. I think I also want to acknowledge the huge contribution of Ian Snowden and his team in LPS, and I think it was no mean feat to turn LPS into a fund-giving agency rather than a fund-taking agency in such a short space of time. By way of context, let me be very clear. Reval 2020 for many of our members was not a positive experience. It saw many town centre based independent food retailers' rates bills rise significantly, while major out of town multiple superstores actually got a reduction. And a clear example of this was Tesco Knocknagunny, which already had an unfair competitive advantage with its out of town location, free car parking, no red coats, and even has a bus route service in it. It actually had a reduction in its rates bill. So the rates, or the Reval 2020, for many independent retailers was badly out of step with the reality and indeed the actual market value. And I think that was important that we put that into context. And obviously the Reval 2020 took place when this place was in abeyance. And if I can now turn to the bill in question, I think it's absolutely right that you gave this bill further scrutiny, because it has significant implications, I think not least for 39A of the Rates Order 1977 in relation to the appeal process after the 2020 valuation list. And obviously, when you're removing somebody's right of appeal, that should never be underestimated. And I think that I understand the context, and again, whilst restating our appreciation of 2 years rates holiday, removing the right of appeal should never be taken lightly. I think it is fair to say that no one likes this bill, but it does in a very blunt way correct the unintended consequence of the pandemic. And indeed, as your committee has already heard, similar legislation has been passed elsewhere in the UK. I'm also very conscious that if this bill did not pass, it could result in a £255 million shortfall in councils and public services. I think you rightly raised the issue about consultation. Both Roger, myself and other business groups did take part in a virtual meeting with the Minister on the 18th of November with himself and representatives from LPS to discuss this bill. I think the reality of everyone in this room knows that the pandemic has resulted in so much legislation which normally takes months or even years of consultation and parliamentary time is being rushed through quite often in a matter of days, if not weeks, without even a full impact analysis on business. So obviously rushing through legislation like this is something that is just a sad reality of the pandemic. I think looking forward, I think there's one thing, and I would agree with the point that Matthew Toole raised, that it might be useful to ask the Fiscal Council to take a considered view of this, and it's obviously not for me to advise the committee who they should speak to, but I don't think, given their role, that wouldn't be an unnecessary thing to do. I think, secondly, I think it's absolutely vital that Reval 2023 learns from the mistakes of Reval 20, and that this valuation list is a true reflection of independent retailers and reflects the fact that we do have a radically changed high street brought about by COVID-19. I think lastly, and this has been a long-term policy position of Retail and I, we've always advocated that there should be a non-domestic rates forum be established to advise the Minister and LPS on issues like this, and to ensure that we can co-design significant changes to what is a broken, antiquated and not fit for purpose system of business rates. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Roger.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair and members. Yes, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today on behalf of the many thousands of businesses and business owners in the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. Non-domestic rates are always an unpopular form of taxation for businesses because they're levied irrespective of sales or profits, and they're an upfront overhead that is for many a great barrier to business. And the specific issue here is the Non-Domestic Rates Coronavirus Valuation Bill, and this is an extraordinary measure at an extraordinary time. And the effect of the bill, if passed, will be to remove the impact of the coronavirus pandemic as grounds for challenging non-domestic rating valuations. Now, the concern of the Department is that all 74,000 NAVs on the 2020 valuation list could be up for challenge if this legislation is not passed. They argue that the risk to the public purse is too great from this challenge. But the corollary is that the Department wants to protect the public purse by transferring the loss or risk of loss to the private purse. And the question is that fair or appropriate? And the legislation is also said to be future-proofed. They estimate that the potential loss to the public purse is between 195 million and 255 million. And again, this is protecting public money by risking private. And as businesses have already received support during the COVID pandemic to date, the Department argues that this legislation is in the public interest. But the support received to date was about assisting survival to date, and it was met out of funding that was given to date. This bill is about limiting the ability of business to ensure fair treatment in the future, against a backdrop of the Department signalling a default to lack of generosity. Now, we recognise that similar legislative process is being followed in other parts of the UK, and in tandem with that, there's a £1.5 billion rates package being made available in England, from which the Northern Ireland Barnett consequential is about 45 to 50 million, which the Department has stated will be ring-fenced for business support. Is that an accurate reading of their plans? What will that ring-fencing comprise? Who will be within the ring? Officials have said that it's their intention to ring-fence any associated Barnett consequentials to ensure that it can be allocated to business ratepayers in the 2022-3 financial year. That's welcome, but the mechanism for distributing the funding here has not been decided. So we await the detail with interest, but we can't really comment on the impact in parallel with the loss of an appeal mechanism without that detail. And we have a concern because the Department states that it's highly unlikely they will follow the English approach because they have given 29,000 businesses rates relief. The 12-month rates holiday, every business received a 4-month rates holiday last year, and tens of thousands of businesses received one or other of the business support grants that are on their way, that were based on their NAV. But that support, as I said earlier, was in the past funded by extra money from HM Treasury in the past. The fact that it was given then shouldn't be used as a reason for being mean-spirited in the future, i.e. next year. Officials have said they'll design their own approach separate from the one in England, and that they will advise the committee what that will look like. Until that point, we're all really in the dark. But there is a double risk to consider. One is that the cost to administer any sort of subjective scheme will eat up significant resource that could otherwise go to businesses. And two, that an extensive cohort of appeals could clog the system and leave many businesses in difficulties just while waiting. So I spoke to some of our members just in the valuations side, valuations and land and estate agency side, just to get a sense from them. And they flagged up three concerns that they thought we should bring in today. One is that so far only about 20% of businesses have advised LPS of the rental that they pay. So there's a very small evidence base on which the valuations will be established. The second is that Reval 2023 will be almost entirely computer-generated and desk-based, so it will be very limited in intelligence being brought to it of what's happening on the ground. And the third is around the loss of an appeal that is in some way related to coronavirus, because that would suggest that you're going to need a process of triage to decide whether that is an allowable appeal before you get anywhere. So that sort of risks doubling up the amount of potential bureaucracy being applied to it. So say that was a very quick summary back from members as to what their concerns are on what's proposed to date, and happy to pause at that point.
Okay, I have a few questions and we'll move around. Roger, you referred there to 20% of businesses have reported back. Why is that figure low? And I'm not blaming by no means the businesses. What's your taking away that figure so low at this stage?
I suspect there are a couple of things. One is probably the timescale. This has had to be pushed through very fast. So the department, as Glenn says, the department has engaged with us. They've certainly done what they can. They wrote a draft letter. We then shared that with nearly 6,000 business owners. Others have done the same. That has resulted in around 16,000 responses coming in of the 75 or 80,000 that we need to see. And that, I think, is the time scale. There hasn't been the sort of promotion of this revaluation in the way there might have been in the past, and there hasn't been time for that. And there really have been. We're just in a different environment for sharing these sorts of messages and getting people to be talking about it.
Glenn, you referred to a bad experience of Reval 2020. Based, if you were to appreciate your sort of crystal ball and guesstimating, if the 20% that has sent information back, what do you see the Reval 2023 looking like based on that? Now, I appreciate we're doing a lot of, but you know where I'm coming from. So you 2020, you're going to have the 2023 Reval. Where's it going to be as an NAV for those 20% of businesses?
I suppose the first thing is we don't know what the 20% are. So what type of business they are, you know, and this is a gross generalisation, but you might suggest that office businesses are broadly have been slightly more insulated from the pandemic than hospitality businesses, for instance. Yeah. So if you'd had the bulk of those 20% coming from office businesses, you're not going to see a huge change in rental values. If you'd had the bulk of them coming from hospitality businesses, you might see that landlords there have been very responsive and have helped reduce rents, which will change things. So that goes back to devil being in the detail and the lack of a really solid, robust evidence base.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've been very clear that we're encouraging members to fill in the paperwork, because when it comes to appeals, if they decide to appeal, then if they haven't filled in the appropriate paperwork, it's difficult for, obviously, Reval 2023 to take or to acknowledge that their case. So we're very clear, you know, we've relayed a lot of the comms that the Department of Finance have put out about Reval 2023. I suppose what success looks like, I think it's about ensuring there's a level playing field. And obviously, the last Reval, businesses could look online to see what their neighbours got. And it was very easy to see who the winners were in Reval 2020. And I have to say, when you have small family-owned independent food retailers that are seeing a 40-50% increase in their rates bill, and a large multinational like Tesco actually getting a reduction, there is something fundamentally flawed about the system. And this is something that I think that, you know, is part and parcel of a wider reform of our broken, antiquated system of business rates. It is simply not fit for purpose that we have the most expensive system of business rates anywhere in these islands. And whilst we absolutely appreciate the good work that the Minister did with the 2 years rates holiday, and I suppose in one sense that sort of kicked it to some degree, the wider reform process, into the long grass, we nevertheless need to get this fixed. And maybe if I could just touch upon the 50 million, which obviously is from my reading of this, I'm radically wrong, it comes from the budget, the consequential, where independent retailers, small businesses in England from 2022, or April 2022 onwards, will be getting a 50% rates reduction. And I think if that's good enough for businesses, small businesses in Leicester, it's good enough for small businesses in Larne. And we've been very, very clear that we want to see that rates discount applied to small businesses in Northern Ireland. We're not out of this pandemic. There's still a lot of hurt out there. There's a lot of damage done to our high streets. So I think at the very least we would want to see that. Obviously, I welcome the fact that the Minister has commissioned Ulster University to look at this issue. And we've a meeting next week. We'll be outlining what way we believe that money could be spent. But I think it is appropriate that that we do get in the short term that rates discount. And of course, the other thing that was very clear in the budget, and this is something that we had actually been lobbying for some time, is this concept where if a small business, say, wants to grow, wants to, say, to modernise and expand their shop, their business, take on more staff, that they should get a rates holiday to help them do that. That's something we'd like to see here, because if we're in a situation where businesses are taking on new jobs, investing in their business, their high street, where there's always a multiplier effect, then I think the dead hand of rates should be looked at. And again, that has been put forward in England. Again, we want to see that put forward here. So there's a lot the Minister could be doing, and I think given his past record where he's listened to our concerns and acted on them, I would be sort of reasonably hopeful. I've just left the High Street Task Force, where I was chairing one of the workshops, which Pat was there as well. And I know one of the issues at that meeting discussed very, very strongly was the issue of rates reform. And that has to be, if we're serious about locking in recovery, not just from COVID, but growing our economy, fixing our business rate system is an absolute bottom line.
Lynn or Roger, are you seeing any reduction in rental at Cookstown or any town across Northern Ireland? Are you seeing that, which is obviously going to have a big impact, I presume, on this reval? Are you seeing that rental value being reduced? Are you hearing that?
I'm not hearing that yet, no. But whether that's a lag effect, this is the problem. We're moving very fast to do this. We haven't been gathering an evidence base, but anecdotally, I'm not hearing that yet. But that doesn't mean that there aren't businesses under immense pressure that are trying to get a reduction in their rentals, Yeah.
I think the large out-of-town superstores who have performed well during the pandemic, that they should be the ones that their rates bill reflects the fact that they have an unfair competitive advantage over many town centre traders in the likes of Cookstown and the business we visited in Mahara that day, Chair. So all we're saying is that their rates bill should reflect and that's a basic fairness issue. You don't need to be an expert in valuation to tell you that a large out-of-town superstore should pay their way. And I think it was huge resentment amongst small business independent retailers. They saw big, large multinational supermarkets in last reval getting a reduction when they saw their own rates bill increase by 40, 50, 60%. So we've said to LPS, we've said to the Minister, look, these lessons from Reval 2020, we cannot afford now to see those repeated. We simply cannot. The state of the high street, the state of our economy, there's absolutely no way that they could stomach those increases. So I would be hopeful that those lessons can be learned, that we get a fair valuation list which reflects market value. And obviously, and I welcome the fact the Minister has acknowledged this, I think when he was talking in the second stage of the bill that the pandemic will be clearly taken into consideration for Reval 2023.
So the last question from me anyway, Roger and Lynn, if you're not seeing that rental value reduced, is there going to be much difference from the organisations you represent for the Reval 2023? Based on currently what's happening, if the antecedent date jumped a year, let's say it was for argument's sake October 22, that would probably be more reflective of that rental. But you're not going to see that now. Then, if the October date is 2021, am I right in saying that? I
think that's a fair comment. I think the trouble, as I say, is going in without a sufficient evidence base, and I include ourselves in that. We haven't had the time to go out to our members and get a real sense of it, and so I'd rather be hesitant about extrapolating too much on too little evidence that I do have. But one thing that's been flagged up to me is that the effect of the legislation is that matters mentioned in Article 39A of the Rates Order are to be treated as not including and never having had included any matter directly or indirectly attributable to the coronavirus pandemic. So the question that's being put to me by quite a lot of businesses, so if we've improved our premises and added outdoor seating and so on like this, will our rateable value go up because we've improved the premises, given that that improvement was solely related to the need to respond to the coronavirus regulations that have been brought in? And I think that underscores why the devil is in the detail and why we need to see what is being proposed really clearly to understand those sort of unintended impacts.
Good point. Yeah, valid point.
And sorry, can I put a further point down, not a final one, but a further one on that, is that I think we must make sure that this relates solely to the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. Okay. Because I think there's suggestions that, the term pandemic or coronavirus pandemic, but what if we're looking at a different coronavirus pandemic, or if we're looking at an avian flu pandemic? And I don't think we can bring in waiving our rights to appeal so widely. I think we'd need to be really focused about what it is that's being considered here.
Okay, thanks. Jim?
I think you can bet your bottom dollar that if some new virus comes in with a different name, amending legislation will be rushed through to cover it. I think you look at the legislation as drafted, it's quite clear what its intent is, and any variant of will be treated the same. Now, I'll ask the same question that I asked the previous participants, and I think Glyn has more or less alluded to this. I think anyone will accept that DFP and Department of the Economy were extraordinarily generous in the support of your members in the crisis. And I have to say in South Down, the vast bulk of the businesses that I'm dealing with are content, are indeed happy with how they were treated by both departments. And what Glyn didn't mention is the High Street Shopping Voucher Scheme, which has pumped another £143 million into, and quite rightly so, into your businesses. So am I right in thinking that you accept that point and that your concern is how the distribution of the 50 million will be organised, and if it's targeted properly, you can live with this legislation?
Well, I suppose partly the answer to that question to the Chair is how do we get that long-term structural change to the business rate system? Obviously, you're aware when this place was not meeting, that Sue Gray, the then Department of Finance Permanent Secretary, initiated a review of business rates. To the best of my knowledge, I am not sure whether that was ever published or what the long-term thinking is. I suspect this might well be something which I'm very keen to see the High Street Task Force take up and run with in terms of a broader 5-year High Street reconstruction plan, which obviously rates is a key part of that, but also getting infrastructure investment right, planning right, all of the other key issues spread across a number of departments. So that's the outcome I would like to see from the High Street Task Force, which ends its evidence today in terms of the called evidence document. I think the second thing is, yes, in the short term, what is the status of that 50 million? How is it going to be distributed? How is it going to be targeted? And that, I suspect, given that I think Gareth Hetherington from the Ulster University who's been commissioned, I think it will be interesting to see what comes out of that. But I think it is important that April 2022 is not far away, and a lot of businesses who have struggled are suddenly going to have to pay rates again come April 2022. In terms of the spend local card, I think in terms of a short-term boost, it was certainly welcome. It certainly helped, particularly independent retailers who were on that non-essential list, who couldn't even do click and collect at various times through various lockdowns. A lot of them, particularly on the fashion side, were stuck with stock, out of season stock. So I think particularly it has been helpful to those businesses on the non-essential retail who were probably at the most risk. But so I think we need to do analysis of how that money ultimately has been spent. Where has it gone? Has it been majority spent in independent retail? We don't know that yet. But what I would say is that there is a short-term issue about the 50 million, and then there's a medium to longer-term issue about fundamental restructuring of business rates here, and that is absolutely vital.
But I think we're kidding ourselves. Is the 2023 reval is going to leave people happy? There still has an overall funding target. It's simply a matter of how that's distributed amongst small businesses, offices, etc. And I've been in this place 27 years, and I've never met a businessman who said he was happy with his rate demand. I mean, by its very nature, it's a lump sum. It comes in. It's not based on your income. It arrives, and it has to be paid before you can even open the door. So I think if you're hanging your argument on the fact that 2023 will produce an all-singing, all-dancing, equitable, rateable system, it won't, because people will still be very, very unhappy. But you do accept that this institution has bent over backwards to get businesses through this very difficult situation. And therefore, I'm only playing devil's advocate here. You could say that having done all that, plus the shopping voucher scheme, spent nearly £1 billion supporting local industry and commerce through the pandemic, that some pain has to be taken. And forgoing the right to appeal may be the pain that you pay in return for an exceptionally generous support mechanism we've had for 19 months.
Can I just come back on that then? The support we've had for the last 20 months, whatever it is, was very welcome. very well administered. It was an emergency situation none of us had faced before, and as Glyn said, turning one department from fund taking into fund giving very quickly was well done, and it saved an awful lot of businesses from going under. But I wouldn't want anybody, and I'm not suggesting you're painting it this way, but I wouldn't want anybody to go away with the sense that it completely compensated for where people would otherwise have been. A vast number of our members have taken on huge amounts of debt. They've spent their own pension funds, they've cashed in the lump sums in their pension funds to keep themselves afloat. So what was done in the past was done with funds that were provided in the past from Westminster. And what we're talking about here is waiving rights to challenge where people think a decision has been made wrongly out of funds that are yet to come. So the generosity, whilst it was welcome, was not using existing Barnett consequential block grant money. It was additional money that was brought in right throughout the UK to address these very specific problems. And I think there is a concern that, and I thought in looking at some of the evidence that's been given to you already, there was a little bit of a sense coming across from the department that we've been very generous to business to date, and now it's time for us to get back to normal, and that could be quite tough. I think we've got to be very careful. If we're giving away a right to an appeal, if something is fundamentally wrong, is it right to give away the appeal?
The difficulty, and again, only parroting what LPS are telling us, is that any other stance opens the floodgates to potentially 30,000, 40,000 appeals, because almost every business in Northern Ireland could argue legitimately that their valuation, the rental value of their property, has been decreased by coronavirus. I mean, it wouldn't take a genius to see that, for instance, travel agents, small family confectionery shops, dry cleaners, absolutely hammered. Nobody was looking dry cleaning during the pandemic because there was nowhere to go. There was no weddings, there was no formals. So how could you possibly allow appeal mechanism in that situation?
But you may not need to appeal that if the revaluation recognises that those businesses have been detrimentally impacted and reduces their rental value and therefore their rates. But if it doesn't do that, and you deny them the right to appeal that, to come along and set out their case, where does that leave them?
Well, the difficulty is you hope that the 50 million will in some way compensate them for their loss.
And that's where we need to see how is this 50 million going to be distributed and to whom.
And I think that's a valid point. I think that's the committee here. That's one of the roles we're going to have to perform, is to see how exactly that 50 million. Janice has told us it works out about just under £700 per business. Now, clearly, that will not.
But a great many businesses are not going to require this. As I said, gross characterisation earlier about office businesses, that have carried on. Broadly speaking, ones that are not customer facing have probably been less impacted, and there will be lots of our members who will be on the phone to me tonight saying that was a mischaracterisation of us. But broadly speaking, there will be a lot who will not need to have their evaluations changed significantly, and therefore there won't be any appeals. But in other ones, the risk of, and I think this is the point our valuer members were making to us, is the risk of doing this on a computer-based, desk-based basis means that you're missing out on the intel of actually being able to go out and see what's the impact. In some of the towns in your constituency, some of them are like ghost towns. Because of the changes of habits, and others are actually flourishing because people are now working from home and are using those towns more often. So that if you can't get out and see that and get a real sense for it, how do you make sure you've got an informed and effective valuation? And if you haven't, or if the business owner feels that you haven't got that, and you've removed their right to appeal it, where does that leave us?
Thank you.
Okay, Jim. Matthew?
Thank you both for your evidence. Can I just ask sort of hopefully a simple question? Are you both? Is it the position of either of your organisation that this bill is unacceptable in any form?
Well, I think in one sec, this is pretty much an unloved bill.
Sorry, what was that claim?
I think it's pretty much accepted that this is an unloved bill. That nobody.
Unloved bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in many respects it is a necessary evil. It's difficult. There's not a lot of room to manoeuvre on this. Roger's painted there. If you then sort of unpick the last reval 2020, what does that mean for reval 23? What does that mean for the 255 million? Now, absolutely right. A lot of that has come from private sector, from small businesses in so many ways, particularly ones that I've illustrated that had a really bad experience with Reval 2020. think one of the interesting things when we work with our members in terms of appeals with Reval 2020, a lot of them were upheld. So there was quite a healthy.
Those weren't not COVID appeals. Obviously, they were more general.
Because obviously, in terms of that first lockdown, in late March, just ahead of the new valuation list coming into law on the 1st of April, it was a very tight turnaround. I think, and I would get back to the point that I think that you raised yourself. It would be useful to get the Fiscal Council to take a considered view of this, and I think as well. We also need to sort of structure in consultation on not just on this, but we've maintained even before the pandemic there needs to be a non-domestic rates advisory group, which obviously would probably take in most of the main sort of business groups to make sure ongoing challenges with rates, whether valuation or not, or some of the reliefs that we want to see, that they are working effectively. So if that group could almost act as a bit of a touchstone group. So I think that needs to be one action point coming out from this, is that we need to ensure, and part of the point of voting against accelerated package was that consultation issue. Yeah. So if we can have a group that's there that is regularly in communication with the LPS, with the Minister, with the Department of Finance, I think a lot of the problems, I think we might have had a different outcome or changes had there been a Finance Minister in place when Reval 2020 was being considered. Obviously there wasn't, and it was the leeway that civil servants had to do on it was very, very, they literally no room to manoeuvre on it. So I think ultimately this is legislation probably will have to be passed, but there's no great enthusiasm or for it at all, and it is uncomfortable when you do remove someone's right of appeal. And I think, again, what I've said about the 2020 reval, illustrates the depth of opinion out there, that it was a bad and poor experience for many independent retailers.
I think from our perspective, we understand that the Department views Reval 2023 as the means to determine economic consequences of COVID. Yeah. However, is there a risk that this legislation could potentially scupper legitimate appeals on economic grounds? And that's where the grit is in it.
But surely it would be. You mean it would? I mean, it would obviously scupper appeals on the grounds of COVID. That's the point. It would. But are you suggesting there might be other economic effects that would still be caught by the legislation because they're possibly bound up with COVID, or they're difficult to?
The sort of things coming back to me from our membership is people in the supply chain,
right?
So who are affected but not the first in the chain to be affected.
Yeah.
So it'll be less apparent as to where the pressure has come on their business from. So it's that need to prove what type of appeal you have, so whether it's a legitimate economic one or whether it's an illegitimate COVID one.
So the court may say, they may be arguing that this is there's been a severe supply chain disruption over the last 2 years, which is in part to do with COVID, but not exclusively. Brexit, global supply, other global supply issues, other inflations not to do with. So they might have a legitimate claim. That's the concern, that it might be there may be other economic routes, but because COVID may be part of it, the court might say, sorry, it's captured by this legislation, so we can't proceed.
That's the risk. It's again comes back to needing to see the detail of what will be within scope and what won't. Okay.
Wouldn't it be, to play devil's advocate, if either of your members are, if they were presented with, this is grossly simplifying it, but a choice between the option to appeal, which involves bureaucracy, cost, uncertainty, and a degree of certainty over the fact that you can at least be relatively certain that there will be a revaluation in 2023 that will take more comprehensive account of where the economy is now, including the post-COVID world, but also some kind of additional support as part of this 50 million. Is that a bird in the hand, and is the potential for appeal without this bill sort of two or God knows how many in the bush? And would it be better, to play devil's advocate, to have the framework of certainty, even if it means you've got the potential for appeal because of COVID removed? For this to both of you.
Well, businesses always like certainty, and I suppose it'll come down to if you're a winner and you've got certainty that you're a winner, you'll be happy. But if you feel that you have lost out and you have been denied the ability to challenge that on grounds that you may feel are economic as opposed to COVID related, and then somebody is able to deny you that right, that's where it'll get really messy. I would imagine that the bulk of these will go down the middle and people will be broadly content with them, but we shouldn't be trying to make rules for the broadly content in the middle. We should be trying to make sure that we protect the ones who are unreasonably affected, or put in some mechanism for that. If they're denied their right to appeal, that they can challenge that, that first denial.
Yeah, I mean, I think Roger makes some very, very valid points. I think, you know, we obviously await to see what the 2023 reval will, and I hope that, again, the lessons, I've had some good discussions with LPS and with the Minister on this, so I would be hopeful at the very least that there will be significant changes. I mean, and the point was raised, and Mr. Wells made the point that reval essentially is about how you cut the cake. You know, it's not about growing the size of the cake, it's how you cut it. And obviously, from our point of view, you know, we want to see the most equitable cut as possible, which reflects the, you know, the reality of that this is a small business economy. You know, we're still a strong independent retail sector here, and that the large out-of-town supermarkets who do not pay their way in terms of rates, who have unfair competitive advantage over many town centre traders, that their rates bill reflects the fact that they have that competitive advantage, that they have in many senses a bus route that services them, that they have no red coats, they have free car parking, all of those things there, that should be reflected in their rates bill. And there was, when Sammy Wilson was Minister, there was an element of that where he tried to put into the rate system where if you're a large out of town, well, not necessarily out of town, but if you were a large NAV, that you would pay more. There was a surcharge, and that money was used, I think, to fund the first tranche of the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme. So, you know, there has been elements to try and do that within the system in the past. Now, I would hope that the reval 2023 reflects that. But listen, I mean, the revals are always a technical exercise to some degree. What we now need to focus on are the structural changes that we need. I mean, the only taxation power Stormont has is the regional rate. That's unique amongst other devolved institutions. And there are big questions about how, you know, whether that is needed in the future, what other ways we can sort of effectively raise on a fair, equitable basis a property-based rate system. Now, those are bigger questions that I'm fairly sure would be great to see your committee getting its teeth into such an inquiry. But in the here and now, we've got to, I suppose, look at this bill. There's not a lot of room to manoeuvre on it. What's going to happen with the 50 million? But also think, what's the long-term plan here?
So that's my final question, then, Chair. Thank you for that. I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said on the out-of-town shopping centres. It's obviously, as you say, not what we're talking about today, but there's a very strong argument. And of course, didn't get my own plug in for the Ormer Road and Lisburn Road and Stramels Village and the western half of the Craiga Road. And all the whole Craiga Road's nice, but everywhere in South Belfast are very good roads, but to areas of shopping. But the point, I suppose, is for some of those businesses on those high streets, you mentioned the Fiscal Council before, and you're right, Glenn, I did ask about the Fiscal Council looking at. We've actually got correspondence from the Fiscal Council. I won't go through it. You don't have it in front of you. It wouldn't be reasonable to question it. But I think one of the things they say is, I suppose, that some of the estimates about potential revenue loss are not unreasonable or not extravagant. I think I'm correctly depicting what that was a question that we wanted to ask them. And in that light, you know, wouldn't some of those businesses be, you know, they are small businesses are actually some of the most important users of council services. Actually, quite often it's small businesses, for your members and my small businesses on high streets, the one I mentioned, are the first ones you hear from when it comes to councils not delivering services, whether, you know, whatever those are, whether that's around kind of you know, public realm, waste collection or whatever else, and even broader strategic stuff around strategies for particular spaces. Do you think there would be a concern from both of your members if there was serious, the principle basically of losing a load of revenue to local councils and what that might mean for their ability to support them. Is there, and that's set against the admitted frustration about lack of appeal, but that there's also a fact that there's a risk to them too if the council's revenue is in jeopardy, or a significant chunk of it is.
I think there's a wide recognition of the need to put money in the kitty if we want decent public services. I suppose that's evidenced by the business improvement districts. So certainly within FSB and our own offices, we voted to continue the business improvement districts. So we pay extra money in to try and do our bit to improve the area in which we operate. And it goes back to the point Mr. Wells made about this wasn't with an intention of seeing people hoping to get their rates reduced with a view to a smaller pot at the end of the day. But this is an extraordinary time. There is additional money coming in to recognise it's an extraordinary time. And what we're discussing here is the system that will be in place to ensure that new money coming in to replace money that's not being collected does so in such a way that the people who are contributing the funds aren't unreasonably penalised and have the right to appeal if they feel that they are being.
Yeah, I suppose the other element to this, if there's a significant loss to finance of local government, then do they then, when they strike their rates, do we see a situation where their bit of the rates is increased and on non-domestic or on businesses? So I think that that's a factor as well. And I think, in fairness, I think the Minister has already raised that. In the Assembly a few weeks ago. So there is that to be sort of factored in. There are no easy options in any of this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That's me done, thank you.
Alicia?
Thank you, Rose. It's very welcome and informative, just the whole discussion. But there's a couple of wee questions I'd like to maybe just focus on. The right of appeal. And I know on a number of different occasions it has been said that one is denied the right of appeal. But is that really the case? Or is it not just the right of appeal on a specific ground?
But if you finish that sentence, the right of appeal on specific grounds is going to be removed.
Specific grounds, i.e. COVID?
Yes.
Yeah.
But the trouble is who determines whether it's a COVID ground or another economic ground, and without the ability to make your case in front of anybody, how is that assumed?
Well, that's the point that I make, is that a person may be appealing on other grounds, and it's them themselves, the appellant, who decides on that, but that if they make an appeal based on COVID, then that's not accepted.
But if they make an appeal based on some form of economic down, I don't want to try and work out some notional scenario here, but if they make an appeal on the grounds of some sort of economic impact, and they lodge that appeal, and the department turns around and says, no, but that's a COVID-related economic impact, appeal denied, where do they get their chance to make their case more formally and fully?
Well, I have no idea now how it is that one might decide whether or not you introduce COVID at that stage. But effectively, the point being just is that one still has the right of appeal. It's only a case where you don't have the right of appeal on the grounds of COVID.
But, am I correct in saying this, Rod? Your point is, if I put in an appeal and based it on, no, it's a business problem, and they say, no, it's not, it's COVID, I don't have an argument. I can't put my argument across.
Yes.
So effectively, anything related to COVID is thrown out.
Yes, and so, and I suppose I'm not suggesting for a moment the department would act this way, but if they have the ability to disallow something straight away, without risk of then having to refund money or adjust rates, bills or anything else, or spend time on that process, that's going to be very tempting, especially if there's an awful lot of that type coming in. And the risk is then that you just deny people a fair system.
Well,
that's the concern.
I just make the same point again. It's not the case that the right of appeal is still there, but on specific grounds that one doesn't have the opportunity to appeal.
Yeah, I think maybe the interesting question, I suppose the response to that question is, how many appeals were made in the basis of COVID in Reval 2020? I don't know whether...
1,800 or something, isn't it? 1,800, 2,000, around that sort of figure.
Yeah, and I think again it would be interesting to see. I'd be very interested to see what the breakdown on that is. But it does make me feel uncomfortable. When even though the right of appeal generally is not removed, but on the specific issue of COVID, given the impact that lockdown, particularly obviously for many non-essential independent retailers who couldn't open, in fact couldn't even do click and collect during lockdown 1, so they had no ability to trade at all. And that of course would have a material impact on their business.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you accept that the right of appeal has not been removed. But then when it is the case of, we'll say, where business have been impacted as a result of COVID, it's on that very same basis too that they've received much of the support that they have received to date that you welcomed, and I would agree with you entirely on that. And mind you, I agree with you too on the comments that you've made in relation to many of the other multinationals who I often feel are not paying their fair share. But Roger, I hope you don't mind if I come back to statements you actually made as well. Just that whenever you said that we really do appreciate what we received from the Department of Finance and so on in relation to the support throughout that whole period. But we feel now that they're coming back to us, sort of saying that we're getting back to normal. Now, what actually do you think, or what did you mean by that, getting back to normal?
I get the impression from it was evidence given to this committee by Ian Snowden, and he said it's our intention to ring-fence any associated Barnett consequential funding to ensure that it can be allocated to business ratepayers in the 2022-23 financial year. So that's good on face value that it's going to be allocated in that way. But I got the sense from other evidence given that there was a feeling that business had been well looked after in 2020-21 and 2021-22, and that it was now time to start to, I suppose, recover some of that or to rebalance things slightly. That's the sense we've got. Now, we won't know until we see the detail on how they do intend to give that assistance.
Well, then, and getting back to normal, would that effectively mean that both local government, councils, and the central government here, would say from Stormont in itself, will now continue with the services that they normally would have provided to date? Would that be like getting
that wasn't what I was meaning. What I was meaning was that there may well be a tendency not to recognise in the core valuations the fact that we have been through such a turbulent 2 years of trading and are not out of that yet. So therefore, if those core valuations don't reflect the changed reality that we've been facing for so long, then businesses will be being charged too much in rates. And if they are, they won't have the ability to appeal it. That's the concern.
Yeah, but which is a different question, really, in a sense, and that you express, and we'll say a lack of confidence maybe in just how it is that these valuations will materialise for different elements, we'll say, within the whole business structure, as opposed to getting back to normal. I.e., at the end of the day, like, government has to continue to function, and councils have to continue to function, and that is normal.
Absolutely, and I think that's what the Barnett consequential is hopefully going to come in to achieve, and therefore presumably it's intended to replace income that's not coming in from the business base, and therefore the way in which that 45 or 50 million will be distributed will be material to that.
Yeah, and that'll be important just to see how that all works out.
And I think maybe just to put it in a slightly wider context, your businesses are facing almost a perfect storm of cost issues. From national insurance increases to obviously huge increases in energy. They've got to also pay a living wage increase as well. So all of that has to be factored in. So it is appropriate that if Stormont has the only taxation power that Stormont has, that should be reflected. So that 50 million is important because those businesses are facing a perfect storm of cost issues, which will hamper our recovery. And I think it's only right that the Department of Finance plays its role in supporting businesses in that context.
And I'd agree entirely in that, and hopefully that, we have the confidence that in our departments that they do meet the challenges there.
All right, thank you. Emma?
Thank you, and thank you both for coming in. Sorry, I'm in and out because of question time, so sorry, I just have one question for you. So, what would you prefer, the rates holiday and grants, or the right to appeal?
I don't think it's a realistic choice. The rates holiday and the grants were there at a time when trading was massively impacted. We were all learning about the pandemic, the impacts of it. We were also seeing government massively interfering in, I don't mean that pejoratively, but massively interfering in the way business went about its business. So Glyn's alluded to essential and non-essential businesses. So we defined which businesses could stay open by the nature of what they were selling, sometimes alongside other stuff. So we collectively, government, interfered enormously in the lives of those businesses. So therefore, rates reliefs and grants were entirely appropriate to try and find some sort of smoothing. What we're looking at here, though, is an entirely different proposal where grant assistance is going to be made available, but not necessarily clearly for the business. It may come into councils to replace lost business income. We don't yet know until we see the model. And that's at a time when there are none of those other reliefs or assistances in place. So business is going to be trading, hopefully, in the next financial year. And it's in that context, it's trading, but it's still within a pandemic. So it's trading in a compromised environment, but without those levels of restriction and control that government gave and applied to it. So it's not comparing apples with apples in that tempting choice you gave me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Gemma, up and up, yeah. Okay, nobody else anymore?
Well, I'd just like to come in, Chair, again at the end, and I've listened attentively there to it, and as I've said to the Federation of Licensed Trade that was just in before you. Great to see you this morning at the High Street, and well done. But we see where we're all going with this, and if there's no protection for the businesses, and they're finding themselves in an absolutely horrible type situation. Okay, so if there's that protection is not there, I've seen the fiscal letter as well, if I'm allowed to mention it just, and they're asking us to take a second legal opinion on some of the problems that's out there. But you and I both know that the reality is that there is a fear out there, and if they cannot appeal some of these bills which is coming to them, I mean, there's a lot of pressure to walk away from business, and if that happens, that cake is still divided up, but it's only divided up by those still standing, and the last man standing pays it all. So we need to be really, really careful and watch how it goes. But tell me, just when you're here, I mean, I hear all the questions for the rates, and most of the businesses, yes, but they'll moan, they'll groan. Nobody likes any sort of bills, Chair. But they are responsible businessmen, and they know the money that they're putting in is going back into the community which they work in, where they come from, and they give employment. A lot of these businesses go, in mind of where you and I were this morning at the High Street seminar, they will not come back. Do you agree?
Well, absolutely, and I think one of the key things the High Street Task Force needs to consider is rating policy. Absolutely. I'm not saying fixing business rates is somehow a silver bullet for solving the problems facing our High Street. It's not. But I think it is one element in a number of elements, and that's why it's the structure of the High Street Task Force is there. The business, trade unions, government departments are all there in many respects as equal players to try and co-design solutions. So what I'd actually like, as I said this morning, you were there, is that what I want to see arising out of this High Street Task Force call to evidence is a 5-year reconstruction plan, which will look at rates, infrastructure, public transport, all of the issues. We know what our future high streets look like. It's clean, green, family-friendly destinations. There are ecosystems for lots of different types of business. And fixing business rates is only one of those elements. More business improvement, as Roger said, that's another important part of it. But the key thing is that there's a collective effort across the executive to meet these challenges, not all of which were created by the pandemic, because the problems were there. The high street was going through a reconstruction phase before the pandemic. The pandemic accelerated that. So I think that is going to be a crucial thing. And really what it's saying, ultimately for the next programme of government, is don't treat business or trade unions or civic society as just consultees. Treat us as partners. And it's saying that the next programme of government shouldn't just be a deal between 5 parties. It should be a wider deal between broader civic society, because we have all KPIs in that in terms of moving our high streets, our economy forward. So, and that's a very different way of doing policy. And I think the key challenge for the next programme of government, and I know I'm slightly straying here, is to overcome that silo mentality and get government departments pushing in the one direction. And to some degree, the High Street Task Force has done that by, we have officials from economy, finance, DERA, infrastructure, communities, all around one table, talking with business, trade unions, and the voluntary sector. And that's good. That's a new way of doing stuff in this place. And I think that's a good signpost for the way things should be done in the next Assembly term.
I would just, if I may, Chair, just I suppose 3 points I'd like to leave you with that pick up on that. This is the second decade that we're now into of having small business rates relief. So it's a very well-established policy. One thing that could be done to assist small businesses is give certainty to them and embed that small business rates relief as the new norm. Not have this thing where you come up to March every year and wonder if your rates are going to be doubled because you lose your 50% relief. So that would be one thing to send a signal. It's an existing commitment. The Assembly has been meeting now for approaching 12 years, so that would be quite a straightforward one, I think. The second one is that rates policy should recognise the new normal that's emerged during the pandemic and doesn't try to reset the clock to 2019. Lots and lots of things have changed by the way people move around, where they do their business, how they do their business, and so on. And the final one really is that, and it echoes what Glyn's just said, is that the Department, they have been engaging with us a bit recently on this issue, and we appreciate their coming to it in a very short time scale, but I think they should engage with business at the earliest opportunity to ensure that any new system is fit for purpose and that it doesn't overlook potentially affected businesses. And I think that way we're all sort of broadly in the pushing in the same direction together. We're just trying to do it the best way rather than pushing against each other.
Yes, and as Ben has already said, that's complete partnership, and that's the only way to go forward with this, and bringing the businesses with you as well, with all of civic society.
But for practical changes, like for instance the Rates Hardship Fund, it's so out of date, unbelievable, and that was brought into stark contrast during we were dealing with pre-marked fire recovery efforts. So I think there's so many things that need to be fixed. The empty premises rates relief, that needs to be again reactivated and enhanced, where you're actually, if you're a new start business setting up on the high street, that you get your 50% rates holiday in your first year. Things like that needs to be reactivated and enhanced. That capital allowance rates scheme that we have, I think practical things there that would help create jobs, help regenerate the high street, help build our economy. Those are all practical things that are not rocket science, that wouldn't cost very much, but would ensure that many of those businesses that have struggled do have a future.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat, thank you very much. Okay, Glyn, Roger. Thank you very much for your evidence. Appreciate that. And
thank you.
Appreciate your answers. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, just for a few minutes, Chair.
Okay. The committee will now receive oral evidence from Karen Smith from NILGA and JJ Tohill, SOLACE NI, on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The session will be reported by Hansard. So I want to welcome on Starleaf Karen Smith, Head of Policy and Governance, NILGA, and JJ Tohill, but Ulster Council, SOLACE NI. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear us?
Yeah, JJ here's okay, yeah?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
So, Ms Smith and Mr Tohill, you're both very welcome to the Committee for Finance. We have invited you to the meeting in order to hear your views on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The bill will remove largely anything which relates to the pandemic as the basis of appeals in respect of business rates valuations, and this will be backdated to the 1st of April 2020. Please take the next 50 minutes or so between you telling us what you like or dislike about the bill. Perhaps you could tell us how you would like to see it amended, or how you might like to see any supporting finance from the department spent. So over to yourselves. Karen, if you want to go first, if you're happy with that, and then JJ, if you're happy enough.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee this afternoon. NILGA and SOLACE welcome the opportunity to provide oral evidence in relation to the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation's coronavirus bill. From the outset, we note that the bill has not been subject to a formal consultation process, as identified in the accompanying explanatory and financial memorandum. Because rates, whether domestic or non-domestic, are essential to the services delivered by and the very sustainability of councils, a much closer dialogue would have been preferable regarding the preliminary work which we understand was developed as far back as April 2021 and which led to this bill. Co-design, as Glyn said earlier, is a programme for government underpinning ethos which, if fulfilled, results in better legislation and better outcomes. So hopefully going forward, this can be accommodated in a much more joined up way. It's saying that we understand that on this occasion, this is a very dynamic, exceptional situation and timeline, and therefore whatever is required is the order of the day. I suppose by way of slightly wider context, NILGA would commend its Sustainable Council Finances paper as put to the 20th of October Northern Ireland Political Partnership Panel, following work commissioned by the finance subgroup of the panel earlier in this COVID crisis period, when councils were losing around £10 million a month in income through service closures and other deficits. This subgroup, which the Minister for Finance kindly attends, unequivocally approved the Sustainable Finances paper, a paper which seeks to commission a piece of independent work drawing on departmental and council proposals to transform, sustain and protect local government's finances, to be completed by April 2022 in advance of the May elections, if possible. This is a forward-thinking, practical partnership approach, and we will offer the committee the document so that you can consider it outside of the short timescales and specific bill debate. Frankly, it's a win-win and should be endorsed before the Assembly stands down, per the recommended approach described. Furthermore, it's a reality that the pandemic and its impacts are far from short-term, whatever was thought whenever the department implemented reval in April 2020. The introduction of this necessary piece of legislation further shines a torch on the antiquated and vulnerable rate system, which, along with a long-term pandemic, could combine to cripple councils. We therefore continue to strenuously urge a complete remodelling of council finances, commissioned before the storm at recess, appreciating that this and councils fall outside of the Independent Fiscal Commission's work. Returning to the bill itself, as local government bodies working regionally with and for all 11 councils, we believe it would be very helpful if further information from Land and Property Services was provided to help councils assess the impact if the bill were not to be passed. This would have helped to inform our understanding to subsequently support any representation or submission. Relevant information is absolutely crucial to setting objective, fair, affordable rates for 2022-23 and beyond. However, in the here and now, anything that mitigates against further council income losses based upon exceptional times and a realistic approach to affordability and compensation is welcomed. NILGA therefore welcomes this bill as an attempt to ensure non-domestic rates income is protected. It is our understanding that this legislation is designed to protect the risk of further appeals against the non-domestic rate base as a result of the pandemic. The committee will understand that as local government, NILGA and SOLACE require information and time to digest something so crucial to our very survival. Nonetheless, we commend our longer-term approach to the committee and thank the Chair and members for this opportunity. Just hand over to JJ now.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Okay, JJ.
Chair and members, thank you for the opportunity to make representations to you. Local government spends over £800 million on critical services across the 11 Northern Ireland district councils each year. £350 million of this sum is funded from district rates, £350 million from non-domestic rates, the remaining coming from service income and from government grant support. Non-domestic rates income is therefore a very critical source of income for council, as it funds close to half of our services. Any issues or policies respecting security of non-domestic income represent a critical financial risk for councils, with the potential to lead significant service cuts and or substantial rate increases. Councils therefore welcome any reasonable attempt to ensure that non-domestic rates income is protected, and it would appear that this legislation is designed to protect against the risk of further appeals against the non-domestic rate base as a result of the pandemic. Non-domestic rates income is already under significant financial pressure. At this point, almost 25% of the 2020 non-domestic rates revaluation list is under appeal. This will lead to inevitable and retrospective income reductions once appeals are completed. The last thing needed by councils was for this exposure to be increased by another layer of further appeals arising from pandemic implications. Local government has continually highlighted the view that an allowance for successful appeals should be factored into the revaluation process, as inevitably the loss in income through appeals has to be replaced by raising rates and/or implementing service cuts. Furthermore, we would expect that businesses who availed of government rates relief packages during the pandemic would not be allowed to appeal for reductions during this period. This would appear counterproductive to the whole COVID-19 government support process. The risk of legislation that does not protect councils from valuation appeals on the grounds of COVID-19 comes in the midst of a range of other financial challenges for councils as they embark on their 2022-23 rates process. For example, old rating debt write-off during the pandemic has been minimal by Land and Property Services. Until this is brought up to date, a very significant and unknown liability is building up for councils. Service income, particularly leisure and off-street car parking services, continue to be significantly impacted by the pandemic. Pay awards, national insurance and significant inflationary pressures, particularly energy pressures, and additional wage costs will also have to be funded. In summary, while the process and pre-engagement with councils with respect to the introduction of this bill could have been significantly improved, all Northern Ireland councils clearly will welcome any legislation which helps to protect their finances in both the short and longer term. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Karen and JJ, thank you very much for that information so far. I have just a couple of questions to probably both of you, and you can answer whoever you think is relevant. Obviously, JJ, you're in Mid-Ulster Council. I presume you can talk about it maybe in more detail, to be fair, or broader if you wish. That's up to you. Is councils planning any increase in business rates if this bill is not passed? Have you done any preparatory work for that, or are you just sort of waiting to see the outcome of these next few weeks?
Sure. If I could respond in the first instance, you will probably be aware that councils are at a very early stage of the rates estimates process. At this stage, it's a very fluid situation. We're obviously looking at the entire economic environment in which we're positioned and that in which our ratepayers are, and we're liaising quite closely with both the Department of Finance in relation to the estimated penny products that we're likely to face, and the Department for Communities in relation to the grants that we would traditionally expect to get at this time. It's very difficult to plan for such an unknown situation. Councils and SOLACE in particular commissioned advice and support from the University of Ulster shortly after COVID took effect, and we were presented with a very worrying situation that there was a significant threat to the rate base, particularly in relation to non-domestic rate income, and we were therefore very grateful for the support that the executive gave us. And that enables us to do a little bit of financial modelling in terms of scenarios. At the moment, we're probably we're trying to sit on the fence, if you like, because we're really not sure what way this is going to play out. As different speakers have made representations today, if this bill is not enacted, there is a significant probability, an increased probability of there being a loss of non-domestic rates income to councils as a result of appeals being successful. If that happens, if councils are not to significantly cut their services, they will be faced to increase the rate that all ratepayers will pay. And that obviously is something that we would prefer not to have to do and would be counterproductive. In terms of our council, I suppose there's a bit of a watching brief. In terms of other councils, I suspect we're pretty much doing the same thing. It's very difficult to anticipate situations like this because we already are aware of a significant backlog of pre-pandemic debt in other words, previously unpaid rates bills, which have yet to be written off. The methodology which supports the calculation of the rate that district councils will strike both for non-domestic ratepayers and ratepayers includes reflection on how much debt will be written off in any single financial year. And over the pandemic period, there has really been no debt written off, and in previous years the amount of debt written off was probably a lot less than, with the benefit of hindsight, the Department of Finance might have written off. You will appreciate, I'm sure, that writing off debt is a very legalistic process. It often involves going to the EJO, and even when you get there, there's no guarantee of any sort of success in terms of recovery, and then the final decision has to be written off. The mechanics of what will happen here if we are faced with an absence of this legislation is, I think it's highly likely there will be a lot more appeals. Those appeals will, by definition, go through a process, and I think it's a 3-stage process ultimately to the Lands Tribunal. Because there are more appeals, there's likely to be more debt written off. That debt written off will then have an impact on the amount of rates income that a council can achieve, and therefore from any given ratepayer, and that will cause them to put the rates up. So it's a bit of a vicious circle, and as I said a few moments ago, we're trying to sit on the fence to see what way this will go, because it's really, really hard to model outcomes in such uncertain circumstances. I think that, while long-winded, hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you, JJ. And Karen, do you want to comment on that? Or?
It's really just to emphasise again the difficulties presented by the uncertainty in relation to this. If we're sitting, we don't know whether the bill's going to be enacted or not, and the time frame involved in that. I mean, I think JJ will keep me right here, but it's my understanding that the councils need to strike rate by mid-February. So it's knowing sort of how to deal with all the potential impacts of that. And I mean, I think JJ and the school are doing a valiant job in doing that, but certainly we would welcome the certainty provided if the bill is enacted.
Okay, and one final question from me. Obviously, there's a conversation regarding the £50 million Barnett consequential that can come into Northern Ireland because of this bill. What's your thoughts on that, and how that should be spent to support business?
Karen, do you want to go first, or will I answer?
I was going to defer to you, to be honest. I'll be honest with you, Chair. I mean, really, we haven't had an awful lot of time to look into the implications of this, because this has kind of been quite a surprise for us. And it's, as I say, we welcome it, but I mean, we need to have further ongoing conversations with yourselves, with the department, as to work out the implications of this, you know. So I need to put a hold on giving you a definitive reply to that at the moment.
No, fair enough. Appreciate that, Karen. Yeah, go ahead, JJ.
Sure. If I might respond. Where I come from, we sometimes talk about being on a cleft stick. In other words, no matter what way you turn, it could break. If the Barnett consequential money is distributed among businesses, and with nothing coming to the councils to reflect the fact that their income will be down, will presumably be down if the pandemic continues in the form that it has in the past 18 months, then we will inevitably have to increase our rate to maintain equivalent service levels, and that will play across all ratepayers, not just non-domestic ratepayers. In other words, domestic ratepayers who bear in our council approximately 60% of the burden. If, on the other hand, the money is in some way distributed so that councils get an allocation, then that in some way protects the non-domestic ratepayers to an extent, with, I'm sure, that the larger amount being directed towards the non-domestic sector through whatever support mechanism the Assembly would consider appropriate. So, selfishly speaking, we would like to see some of that support directed towards council to compensate them for the continuing reduction in income that we face, because that does have a direct impact on the amount of rates income that we have to generate, because a lot of our services are provided on a deficit funding model. In other words, it takes a certain amount of expenditure to provide a service, that expenditure is reduced by fees and charges that we levy perhaps on participation, for example, at leisure centres, and the net cost is what the ratepayer has to pick up. If we have less income through the door, the net cost will be higher, and all ratepayers will have to pay a higher rate. But I understand it's a very challenging decision for the executive to have to face, but selfishly we would like to participate in any financial windfall, if you like, that was possible.
Okay, thank you. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just thank you for, well, first of all, JJ, thank you for, that's the first Christmas tree I've seen, I think, in video evidence, so fair play and Merry Christmas. You mentioned councils would like to get some of the Barnett consequential if the 50 million comes through. Can I just be clear, do you mean councils want some of that even if this bill passes and you have a bit more certainty that you have a bit more certainty over the fact that you're not going to face appeals or appeals related to COVID?
Thank you. Well, the bill passing is certainly going to give us a little bit more certainty, although we are already facing a significant amount of pre-pandemic debt that has to be written off. If businesses, as I have no doubt, are under significant financial pressure, I think we're going to see a lot more businesses under strain. So there will inevitably be even more debt to write off, and those debt write-offs factor into your rate. So we would like to see some support to councils, because regardless of what way the executive goes with this, there will be less people availing of council services, and less people availing of council services mean less contributions towards our costs of providing those services, and therefore a higher rate. So not to avail of that funding would mean our rate would be higher than it would be if we did avail for it. So I would be making a representation on behalf of the sector for some financial support, regardless of what way this turns out. Now, if the bill passes and it reduces the possibility or potential for a limited number of appeals, as I think it was Mr. McHugh said, there will still be a right of appeal. That inevitably will reduce the quantum of successful appeals. But in any given financial year, those appeals will not be written off. They will be written off in a future period, because it takes time to get from A to B. There will be a process whereby any appeal gets considered by a valuer. It gets appealed up through the system, ultimately to the Lands Tribunal. So we may not see the financial effect of the appeals that potentially are being, their fate is being decided now by yourselves in terms of, are you going to allow them or not? But no matter whether you allow them or not, we will not feel the financial pain of those appeals until probably 3 or 4 years' time from now, possibly longer. And that's part of the problem with the existing system, in that there's a backlog of tens of millions of pounds of old debt that needs to be written off. As it's written off in any given financial year, that will reduce the amount of money that councils will be able to derive from their rate base, and that will therefore mean that we will have to strike a higher rate. So I'll summarise by saying, regardless of whether the bill passes or not, I would like, on behalf of the local government sector, to suggest that the committee and the executive consider making some of the available funding available directly to councils.
Okay, that's helpful. Sorry.
If I could back in, if that's okay,
yep.
Chair. It's really just sort of following on a point I think Roger made earlier on about the outworkings of the funding not being a desk-based exercise. This has to be a co-design, and I would like to think that local government will be part of the co-design of how that funding is put out. And I mean, obviously it'll have to include the small business sector as well, and the sort of business sector generally. But you know, there's just other implications, and JJ made a very good point and case in relation to involving local government.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. My other point, JJ, you mentioned there was a number that you mentioned, which is 20% of, I think you said 20% of valuations have been appealed. Is that in Mid-Ulster, or is that in general?
That's across Northern Ireland. We would get those figures from LPS.
Yeah, they're from LPS. Do you know if they? Okay.
Sorry.
That's helpful. Do you know if they include COVID related appeals, i.e. do they include the appeals that will be invalidated if this legislation passes?
Well, to be honest, I don't know definitively. We get statistics which tell us what the quantum of appeal is, the numbers, and the financial, the element of the rate base that represents, but we're not aware of what the rationale for each appeal is. So I honestly couldn't give you an answer to that.
And would 20% be higher than your average? That's my last question.
Again, to be honest, I can't answer that question because we don't deal with these figures directly. We get updates from LPS, and the last updates was the 2015. What I can say with a good degree of confidence is I wouldn't want to say it's an absolute fact because it's very difficult. Well, it's not your information to say this, but we understand from LPS that the LPS valuation process is very robust, and that in the context of the UK appeals mechanism, is probably the wrong word to use there, but that ultimately our level of successful appeals in Northern Ireland is much lower than the level of successful appeals in other jurisdictions. So I'm sorry, I just can't be definitive and say that it's whether that's a normal figure or not. It's came to me from LPS, so I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Matthew, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Jim?
I'm somewhat bemused because in addition to your role of securing funding for council services, you also have a general community responsibility to look after businesses within your 11 constituencies, as it were, your 11 council areas. And yet the impression I'm getting from you is that all that you're looking for is to secure the money, with very little consideration given to the thousands of businesses within your council areas that have suffered so badly as a result of coronavirus. And you used the phrase to be selfish. Well, that's exactly, you're correct, you were. And it was all about, let's get the money in, let's secure certainty for funding for services. But have you given any consideration to the businesses that will be denied the right of appeal, yet they've been devastated by coronavirus?
Mr. Well, thank you for the question. Well, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I'm unapologetic about being selfish, because local government provides services to both businesses and non-domestic ratepayers, and we have statutory services that we cannot fail to provide, and they cost money. If we don't secure the funding, then inevitably services can't be delivered, and that benefits nobody, neither businesses nor the domestic ratepayer. We do have a very high regard for businesses. Throughout the pandemic, we worked really closely with various departments to distribute funding. We reprofiled all of our economic development funding as best we could in the circumstances to try to support businesses and communities. We came together with other agencies to support food distribution centres, etc. They wouldn't be areas that I would be personally closely involved with, and I therefore would do them a great injustice by trying to describe everything that we did. But at the heart of what councils do is the delivery of statutory services and other services which are not preordained as obligations, and those more discretionary services include supporting businesses and working with central government and other agencies to try to help businesses in times just like this. So, as I say, I don't believe that it's wrong to be selfish when we have such a wide range of stakeholders and people that we do need to support, and we do work with a lot of agencies to try to minimise the impacts of these situations. Ultimately, the amount of expenditure that we control in the Northern Ireland public sector is very small. It's only about 4% of the public purse. And whenever you factor in the fact that we have to collect waste and recycle it and dispose of it and provide avenues for the public generally in relation to leisure and recreation, and we're increasingly being involved in promoting the healthy living agenda and live here, love here, to try to help people help themselves, if you like, and therefore reduce the longer term pressure on the public purse. I don't think that it's in any way disingenuous for me on behalf of SOLACE to say that we do want certainty of funding, because that's the only way that we can have certainty of delivery, and there are so many people and businesses that depend on us. So I'll just close by saying I think it would be unfair to reach the conclusion that we have very little consideration for businesses. A lot of our elected members have been extremely active over a long time now in terms of reaching out to businesses, listening to what their needs are, trying to get officers like myself and those that are more closely involved with the delivery of services to find ways that had never been found before of engaging with multiple agencies to try to have a joined up service. So again, if that means that I have to here today be selfish, I'm unapologetic about that.
By your accent, are you Cookstown, any chance?
Well, I'm from mid Ulster. I'm actually from outside Swatter near Mahara, but I've worked in Mahara for so long that I think my accent has.
Well, that can't be all bad, because my wife's from that neck of the woods. But so you've got a travel agent in Mahara, which is your nearest big town, and they have been absolutely devastated by coronavirus, and in fact may never return to the level of trading that they experienced in 2019. And you're saying to them, you're denying them the right to appeal, even though it's self-evident that their business has been devastated by coronavirus. As long as Mid-Ulster District Council gets its money, you're happy.
Well, Mr. Wells, I interpret my presentation to your committee in that fashion. The councils are not making this legislation. We've been asked to give an opinion, as I understand it, in relation to how we feel about it. We as councils have a duty to all the ratepayers, and collectively we have a duty to all the ratepayers across the whole of Northern Ireland, domestic and non-domestic. And if we do not represent the interests of all those ratepayers, then all those ratepayers will suffer. Of course, in our locality, we are extremely concerned about the smaller ratepayers who do not have the resilience that we assume and perceive that larger entities probably do have, and indeed that might be a false an inaccurate assumption at the present time. And we do our best to reach out to those ratepayers. I am not sitting here on behalf of the local government sector and saying that this is ideal. I'm not saying in any shape or fashion that the process by which we have been engaged in this with the relevant department is ideal, because it hasn't been ideal. But we are where we are. I'm making the case, or at least submitting a view, that if anything that is reasonable, and it will be up to the committee to decide whether this is reasonable or not, it's not for me to say, but anything that is reasonable that will protect the rate income of councils has to be for the good of society. And I'm not trying to put one business or one ratepayer down, or to sacrifice one for the sake of another. I can only deal with the finances that we get as a council, and we will apply it as best our members see fit. And that will include trying to reach out to those smaller businesses in our local towns. I'm only here to talk about if this legislation goes through, it will help secure our income. But whether or not that's reasonable, or whatever, I feel that's a decision for yourselves and not myself.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim. No other members indicated. So thank you, Karen and JJ, for your information. I appreciate that, and obviously on the answers put forward to us. I appreciate your honesty, and thank you in the meantime.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, members, then we'll cover points again at the very end. We'll sum up. You're happy enough, unless there's anything you want to put down now specifically. Okay. The committee will now receive oral evidence from the Irish Football Association, the Ulster Gaelic Athletic Association and Ulster Rugby. The session will be reported by Hansard. So I want to welcome on Starleaf Patrick Nelson, Chief Executive of the Irish Football Association, Graham Fitzgerald, Finance Director, Irish Football Association. Johnny Petrie, I hope I've pronounced that right. Johnny, you can clarify that in a minute. Chief Executive, Ulster Rugby. Audrey Robison, Head of Finance and Operations, Ulster Rugby. Brian McAvoy, Chief Executive, Ulster GAA. Stephen McGeehan, Casement Park Project Sponsor, Ulster GAA. And Brian Mallon, Head of Finance, Human Resources and Business Development, Ulster GAA. You're all very welcome to the Committee for Finance. I would like to thank you all for making yourselves available at such short notice. We have invited you to the meeting in order to hear your views on the Non-Domestic Rates Valuation Bill. The bill will remove largely anything which relates to the pandemic, as the basis of appeals in respect of business rates valuations, and this will be backdated to the 1st of April 2020. Please take the next 20 minutes or so between you, telling us what you would like or dislike about the bill. Perhaps you could tell us how you would like to see it amended, or how you might like to see any supporting finance from the Department spent. If we can have an opening statement from the first speaker, or one speaker from each organisation, of no more than 5 minutes, and then everyone else can answer questions if you don't mind. And if we're content, are you happy we go with the IFA, then the GAA, then Ulster Rugby? If you're happy enough in that order, that was drawn earlier. So, happy enough for the IFA going first, and somebody want to kick off just with a few points, please?
Okay, Chair, I will do that. Can I just confirm you can hear me okay?
Yeah, fine. Go ahead, Patrick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Sorry, let me put my AirPods in just in case that is the amount of. Hopefully that's okay. Firstly, Chair, I'd like to thank you and the committee for giving us the opportunity to contribute and speak at this meeting, albeit at very late notice from, I think it was last Thursday evening we heard about this. I'd like to introduce both Graham Fitzgerald, who's our Finance Director, who I hope is on the call. I can only see myself and the committee at this point. And myself. Graham has been our Finance Director for 4 years now, and I've been Chief Executive Officer of the Irish Football Association for 12 and a half years. So we both come to this with some experience. And perhaps I can come straight to the point in that we haven't had a chance to scrutinise this particular bill, although I have heard the comments from some of the recent speakers this afternoon with regard to the removal of appeals, which would always give me a concern in any environment. But in our opinion, and the reason why we wanted to take the opportunity to speak to the committee today, is that the non-domestic rate system in Northern Ireland really does not appropriately cater for the regional stadia that have been built. So 2 have been built so far in terms of Kingspan and the National Football Stadium at Windsor Park, and one, of course, is still to be built, which is Casement. These have all been planned, and 2 have been built through the Department for Communities Regional Stadia Programme, and the rate system doesn't really cope with us at this point. So this was a matter which first became apparent to us during our building process back in 2015. In fact, I remember meeting for the first time with the late Ian May, who was then a new Deputy Secretary at DCAL. And I discussed this issue with him back in 2015 when we were still in our old Windsor Avenue offices, so a long, long time ago. And the original business case from 2011, and my colleagues from GAA and Rugby might also touch on this, that business case was signed off by both DCAL at the time and Department of Finance and Personnel, as it was called at the time. And that was to build the National Football Stadium as part of the Regional Stadia Programme. It estimated our annual rates bill would be just over £100,000 a year, which would have been an NAV of about £170,000 a year. The 2015 list has our NAV at £495,000, with the 2020 reval lifting this to £585,000. So as you can see, we're currently paying significantly more in business rates than was ever envisaged by either ourselves or our government funders, which is why we wanted to talk to you today. So LPS use what's called the contractor's principle, for calculating rates for the National Football Stadium and I think other stadia. This uses the capital cost of build as the starting point, and it doesn't discount the NAV adequately for underutilisation or excess capacity that needs to be built into stadiums, which in rates terms is a term called superfluity. And that's often likely to be present in a building such as a sports stadium, which is built to hold a capacity crowd in a relatively small number of occasions each year. So I know we're often keen to compare to what's happening in GB, and sports stadia in GB are rated according to different mechanisms to those here in Northern Ireland. Case law is very well established in GB in this area. And for those of you who are Scottish football fans, the leading case, or one of the leading cases, is Heart of Midlothian and Hibernian Football Club, so they both work together, versus the Lothian Regional Valuer in 1988. And this discounts rateable value based on the average rather than the peak usage. So we certainly believe that that's a principle that should be used here in Northern Ireland. If it's good enough for GB, we don't see why it couldn't be used here. Land and Property Services and other rating agencies also often use the concept of hypothetical rent in order to build a rating value. And that's the amount that a hypothetical client would be prepared to pay to rent a particular hereditament or building in order to calculate an approximate or appropriate NAV for rates purpose. And I just think it's completely ironic here that we have an actual rent, which is the amount we pay to our landlords, Linfield Football Club, each year. And that was negotiated in good faith with Linfield with no consideration at all given to rating purposes. And yet LPS don't deem this as an appropriate rate to work from. So hypothetical is good, actual not so good. That's a bit strange, really. And finally, I should just say that we've been engaging with both Department of Finance at the former PermSec level, Sue Gray, and in more detail with LPS over the past few years with varying degrees of being heard on this matter. But specifically, we're currently in conversation with Land and Property Services over the NAV for our stadium. So other than the references above, just by way of introduction and context, I wouldn't propose to speak about the specific rateable amounts for our stadium today, given that we are in conversation. And just to finish off, before I hand over to my colleagues, we're not a profit-making organisation. Every pound we raise, we reinvest in football in Northern Ireland. And if anybody saw the launch of our social return on investment model last week, which was done in conjunction with UEFA, you know that we really do generate significant value for Northern Ireland in terms of health, economic and social development for every pound that we have. So we think that the rating system doesn't work for us at this point. We think we can make better use of the funds that ought to be made available to us as a result of a better rating system. And we're pleased to take the opportunity to speak to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Brian, Stephen, or well, two Brians. Brian or Stephen, whichever Brian or Stephen wants to make the comment.
Rugby are going to go second, Mr. Chair, and then we're also is coming in third.
Okay. So
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
One rugby to go.
Yeah, rugby are coming in second and also is going third.
Go ahead, just testing you there. You okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Ulster Rugby. Johnny or Audrey, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks to the chair and to the committee for inviting us along. I hope everyone can hear me. All right. I'm joined by Audrey Robinson, as you said, who's our head of finance and who's been at Ulster Rugby for a number of years. And the approach that we've taken with this is largely very similar to where our friends at the IFA and GA have come at with this. And over the course of any number of years since our stadium was developed and redeveloped in 2014, 2015, we've seen our valuation of rates rise significantly. That had been scheduled prior to COVID to go up to 435,000 and clearly subject to a further revaluation in 2023. I think fair to say that there was a large degree of frustration at the time of the 2020 revaluation, where our valuation rose by best part of 100 grand to that level of 435, and we have serious concerns about the direction of travel looking ahead to that 2023, when it doesn't appear that there's really a clear rationale for stadia arising out of the regional stadia programme, as Patrick referred to there. And Ulster Rugby, much as with the other governing bodies, we're not-for-profit organisations, and everything that we make, all the income that we generate, is invested back into the growth of the game. And for us, it's vital, clearly, that we have a successful professional team at the top end of the game, but moreover that we're able to foster participation and drive growth of the game at domestic levels, both from a health and wellbeing perspective and a social inclusion perspective as well. And our increasing rates only mean that we have less money that we can reinvest in the development of the game. That's clearly further exacerbated coming out of a COVID period, which has been extremely challenging for all sports, not least us, with revenues significantly impacted by crowds not coming through our doors. And we've been very grateful for the support of the executive in giving us rates relief for that period. But we do have concerns about the sustainability of our organisation and of our sport, looking ahead to increasing rates picture. Similarly to where Patrick had mentioned there, and it's not to cover old ground or repeat exactly what he said, when we look at comparison of stadium across in Great Britain, then we feel that the rates that we have to pay at the moment are comparatively punitive. Of stadia that have both similar capacities and similar build costs to us at Kingspan Stadium, and that's across a number of different sports. We also look down, as in comparison, into the south in the Republic of Ireland, where we, as part of an all-Ireland governing body in the IRFU, we have rates that are hugely more punitive than our other three provinces that we compete alongside. And when we have that in conjunction with the fact that our ticket sales are subject to VAT, which is not the case in the south, we have a double whammy of costs that we have to bear that the other provinces don't. And similarly across into GB, we have rates that are in excess of what other sports teams with whom we're trying to compete have to bear as well. As Patrick rightly said, just referring back to the business case, we were in a similar case where our back of the business case for Kingspan Stadium, the rates within that were in the region of £120,000. And although we built into that an element of those rising over a period of time, they are more than double what we had set out in that original business case. And what we're asking for here is really that there's a bit of a sensible approach that's taken, and that the regional stadia are dealt with in an appropriate way and looked at in a reasonable fashion. Because all we want to do is to try and reinvest our monies back into the growth of sport for good social purpose. And that becomes an increasing struggle to do that, particularly at the back of a COVID period when the sustainability of sports clubs and governing bodies is increasingly difficult.
Okay, Johnny, thank you. And Brian McAvoy or Brian Mullin or Stephen, whichever.
I don't know, there appears to be my camera, I don't know, it seems to be buffering, so I don't know if you can see me, but I think you can hear me, can you?
No, we can, Brian McAvoy, we can hear you. I'll continue with Brian, but yes, we can hear you, Brian, but not see you, but that's fine. Go ahead, thanks.
Well, that's a good thing, Well. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just at the outset, can I thank you and the committee for providing Ulster GA with the opportunity to present evidence today, along with our colleagues from the Irish Football Association and Ulster Rugby. As I'm Brian McAvoy, CEO and Provincial Secretary of Ulster GA, and I'm joined by my senior staff team colleagues, Brian Mullin and Stephen McGeehan. The issue of non-domestic rates is one that impacts on all of our clubs, situated within the jurisdiction of the NI executive at community level, and many of our clubs are recognised as CASCs, or community amateur sports clubs, and they are eligible for rates relief from the local authority. So we're grateful for that relief, and we also wish to place on record our own thanks to the Minister and the Department for the additional relief provided last year at the outset of the coronavirus pandemic. So I just want to put that on the record at the very outset. However, it's at county and provincial level where we face very significant challenges in relation to the 2019 re-examination of the net annual value, the NAV, of the rates. As a provincial governing body, like our county committees, we're not clubs, therefore we can't register as CASCs. Categorised among the 74,000 local business premises reviewed at that time, the annual rate costs at our county venues have soared dramatically. And I'll just give you two examples. Our county grounds in Newry and Omagh have doubled in the last 2 years, their rates. In fact, in the case of Omagh, it is more than doubled. We understand from our close working relationship with our colleagues from Ulster Rugby and IFA, who have just made contributions to you, that the implications for modern new stadia with appropriate ancillary facilities situation is poor, as they have shown. They've outlined here the increase in their rates and what they thought they would have been back in 2011, 2012, to as they are now, approaching £500,000 in both cases. Unfortunately, we're not down as far down the road with relation to Casement Park, but if the same criteria were to be applied to Casement Park, given the size of the fact that the stadium, the GA pitch, is naturally bigger than a soccer or rugby pitch, we will be dealing with a 34,000 stadia as opposed to one half that size. You can only guess as to what our NAV will be. It certainly won't be coming in anywhere under £500,000. It'll be much more than that, and that would be a situation which would be very critical for us. The NI Executive has given prioritisation to the Regional Stadia programme and the value it places on social, economic and the health benefits of sport. And indeed, a key factor in assessing rates valuation now is the commercial assessment that's placed on them by the valuers. And I want to make 2 points in that regard. Firstly, football stadia are not like most commercial enterprises. Their revenue generating capacity can only really be realised in the main when games are taking place. This can be quite infrequent, but it doesn't appear that any allowance has been made for the many non-usage days in the rate valuation. We think this is totally unfair position, and as Patrick outlined in his evidence, this is what's known as super fluidity, and he referred to the Edinburgh situation with Hearts and Hibs back a number of years ago. Secondly, as Johnny has also said, we actually pay VAT on people coming through the gates. So in effect, we're being double taxed, both commercially and in relation to people attending our games. So we're getting a double whammy there. We're an all-island organisation in the GA, and we look with envy at our counterparts in the Republic. Not only are, as Johnny said, not only are they not charged any VAT on people coming through the gate, their rating policy looks much more favourably on lands dedicated to sport and recreational activities than is the case here in the north. And of course, in England and Wales, local authorities have discretionary powers which they can apply to sporting bodies to enable them to get enhanced rating relief, and no similar mechanism applies here unless you're a CASP. Each of the three sporting bodies represented in this evidence session were invited about a decade ago, in fact over a decade ago, by the Executive to take part in the Regional Stadia programme. Rates valuations a decade ago, as you've heard, are very different to what they are now. But given the rise in the NAV, it almost seems as if we're being penalised unfairly for being part of a programme for government initiative. We're an amateur, not-for-profit sports organisation. We reinvest about 85% of our total income back into our clubs, either through coaching initiatives, health and wellbeing projects, social capital projects, or indeed capital grants. Coronavirus has impacted on all of us. Some people who would have been regular patrons at our games are a bit reluctant about returning but they're still worried about the effects of the pandemic, and this will undoubtedly continue to impact on our revenue streams for the foreseeable future. So moving forward, the grounds on which the regional stadia programme need to be treated as a separate category, we believe, and the net rateable valuation assessed in a fair and equitable manner. We find it very difficult to comprehend how we are being treated so differently, as I say, to our counterparts with similar stadia sizes in both GB and the ROI. As this bill goes through its committee stage, albeit in a fast-tracked manner, we ask that further conversations are held with the sporting fraternity with a view to putting in place some bespoke exemptions for stadia which fall under the regional stadia programme and indeed larger sports stadia more generally. We want to, as Johnny said, what we do is we invest our gate receipts back into our clubs. We want to continue to do that, but with large rates that would be severely impacted. And finally, just on behalf of Ulster J, again, thank you and the Finance Committee for the opportunity to present to you today.
Okay, Brian, thank you, and Patrick and Johnny. But before you, I just have a couple of questions. Did all your three organisations all receive the 2 years of no rates to pay ultimately until April 22? Did you all receive that? So that's the 24 months holiday, we'll call it.
Yes, we. Well, I can speak for us. We did receive that holiday. Okay.
And Johnny and Brian, yeah?
Yes, we were the same. I'm very grateful for it. It was really crucial to us in managing to get us through the COVID period, actually.
Well, as casement has not been used, unfortunately, that didn't apply to us.
So is that, Brian, is casement classified as derelict, or not derelict, as vacant?
Vacant, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a rate bill on that?
No games in casement parks since 2013, 8 years.
Okay. So obviously you have all referred in your information there regarding the model, the way the rates is done on the three stadia. You know, obviously we can look back and answer on this regarding cost build. I think it was you at the start there, Patrick, referred to your NAV, if I'm correct, sort of at the start was going to be 170. Now you jumped to 585 in 2020, which is a massive increase. So that's slightly different than what we're talking about here today. But to be fair, we will put that in the report, which we're going to feed back to the department. But what's your thoughts on the fact that from theoretically at the moment, April 22, you're going to have a rates bill now for another year before the revaluation kicks into effect in April 23, with no method of appeal. So that's mainly the crux of this. There's obviously other issues to the bill. So therefore, you're going to get a rates bill theoretically in your March, April, May of next year for the normal amount. Let's call it normal, if that's the case, if it still stays the same as it is, for whatever other reason. But you're going to have if this bill goes through, you'll have no method of appeal based on that fact, taking into account coronavirus, which obviously if there's coronavirus and your place is not operational, it's a big impact. So what's your thoughts on that? Because it's effectively this last year we're talking about before the reval kicks in 2023. Do you want to take that, whichever one first? Patrick, Johnny or Brian, whatever one wants to kick off first on that.
Perhaps if we do it in the same order, Chair.
Fair enough.
I think our view from an Irish Football Association perspective will be quite a perverse thing, in that there are very few avenues in life where there is no possibility of an appeal. So if in all of our sports, any of us are shall we say, over exuberant at the weekend, and we end up getting a yellow card or a red card from our referees, we always have an appeal system whereby the decision can be looked at again, and the suspension, etc., or the fine can be looked at again. And of course, in any court system, there is an appeal system. So I think we would just find it very strange that LPS would be able to effectively make itself judge and jury in a situation like this. So we would just in general feel quite cold about that idea, Chair.
Okay, Johnny.
We would very much be in the same position as the IFA on that, Chair. I think where Yeah, I mean, obviously coming out the back of the 2020 valuation, where there's been a number of concerns that have grown with us over that time, looking ahead to 2023, we would certainly be wishing to be able to have some formal process to be able to petition that and to engage in meaningful and productive conversation as to getting to a resolution on this anyway. And if that was removed, that would seem it would seem unfair from our perspective. So we would share that view with the IFA.
Okay, and Brian?
Yeah, we're in total agreement with my colleagues in Ulster Rugby and IFA. Well, it doesn't apply to Casement Park. You know, a lot of our county grounds are exactly in the same position. So it's almost a denial of democracy, isn't it, if you don't have the right of an appeal?
Okay, obviously, when you know the gentlemen when the date now of October 1st of October 2021 was the antecedent date for the new revaluation coming out in April 2023. Obviously, you'll be responding to that. So the information you gave us all earlier, I presume that's what you're going to put in your response, or something similar to that, effectively.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not. We've obviously two topics here. We're talking about the bill, and obviously that's the crux of the debate here. But you know, you are concerned the method of your three organisations.
We will just make, Mr. Chair, just make it. I mean, certainly can speak for Ulster GA. The stakeholder list for the consultation, we certainly weren't included initially. I don't know if my colleagues in Ulster Rugby and the IFA, and I don't know where the fault line lies with that. But you would have thought something so major, we would have been a listed consultee.
Are you referring, Brian, to this constantly in this bill, or are you referring to from LPS communication regarding re-rating? Both.
Yeah, the first we heard of this bill was when we were notified by the Assembly Clerk on Thursday evening.
Okay, that's all I have. I have no more questions for myself. Any other colleagues? Tim? Gemma? Okay. Patrick, Graham, Johnny, Audrey, Brian, Stephen and the other Brian, thank you very much. I appreciate the information you've given us. We'll go away and deliberate on all that, and we'll obviously take into account, to be fair, your points very much about your own. I'll use it the specific method of the way your NAV is calculated. So we'll put that in our report. Happy enough? Yep, okay. Thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep. Okay, members, do we want to summarise, I suppose, from all those evidence sessions, what we need to ask the department? Have you any points? Obviously, the 50 million was a major topic, yeah.
The 50 million is absolutely crucial. I must say the witnesses were generally quite responsible, and Glyn Roberts, clearly they're going to take this in the chin, provided they feel that the 50 million is fairly distributed and targeted.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the best piece of evidence that's come out of this afternoon's hearing, is that that could be crucial. Janice Scott said that it was going to be £679 per firm. Obviously that's going to be meaningless, so it has to be targeted at those that are most hit by what has happened. Some businesses, like Tesco's, will probably have done better than they expected, and others like travel agencies and dry cleaners will be absolutely hammered. So I think it's an important role for this committee to make certain the department really seizes upon this opportunity to use that money wisely.
Yeah, and just on Jim's point, the Minister answered this in the Chamber. I wasn't clear, referring to the 50 million. He referred to if the legislation was passed, but did that mean passed here or passed in the mainland?
I think, Chairperson, what the Minister said was that if the legislation is passed by the UK Parliament, there'll be extra money, the 1.5 billion, and we will get 50 million of that. But the 50 million is not contingent on this bill passing. Okay. But it is contingent on the Westminster bill passing, because they make the allocation. We get a part of consequential. There were a couple of other wee points so the idea, Chairperson, is that if the committee are content, we'll write to the department, ask them to come back next week and answer some of these questions, and maybe members will take some reassurance from that or not. So the things we might ask about are, about the calculation of rates, particularly around hospitality, the pubs and the hotels and the stadia. There's new information there that I haven't been aware of. To ask for the department's comment on the suggestion that there might be a scaled payment. So what would you do with the 50 million? Would you have a scaled payment? What would the criteria and what might they be? What would be the sectors that would benefit? And ask them for their thoughts and comments about that, and indeed to confirm that will some of that money go to the district councils, as was asked. Thirdly then, if I can find my place, in terms of the calculation, just ask for a little bit of detail about whether reduced rents will be taken into account and whether also improvements to premises will affect rating valuations, as we're aware bars all over Belfast and elsewhere now have these beer gardens outside, so will that increase their rates is a reasonable question. The third question then would be to ask for the department's commentary on the suggestion that the bill might be time-bound, whether there might be a sunset clause, to see what they say to that.
Yeah, and just on the 1st of October date, obviously if an individual or business's rent is what it is at the 1st of October, it's an early date considering that it may change in November, December. I know that's always the case, but I take it that's the 1st of October date. What is your rent on the 1st of October? That particular date and time?
That was my understanding, that I thought the department had told us was they would look at a premises as if it was empty on the 1st of October 2021, and what the rent might be, a reasonable hypothetical rent that might be charged on it, regardless of what the business actually is. But there seems to be a greater level of complexity around the pubs, stadia, the hotels.
So there's obviously more than one model, and obviously the sporting organisations is nearly a third model of rating.
Yes, indeed. I think, Mr. Thank you.
Just an additional point. I thought that at times that people were actually confused on what it was that they were talking about, and in particular in relation to retrospective, and that there was this fear that maybe that in not having the right of appeal on the basis of coronavirus, that was establishing the principle as well too then down the line that would impact a whole lot of other areas. And I thought that at times, as I say, that there was a certain amount of confusion even.
Well, I think Roger made the point, and I know what he was meaning, that an individual puts in an appeal based on it's a business issue.
Yeah.
And the department say, no, it's coronavirus.
No, I'm not actually thinking about that in itself, because they actually went on further to state as well too that having established a precedent here, that it might not be coronavirus, but some other pandemic or some other health issue, let's say, as broad as that in some way would allow them then to not give one the opportunity to appeal. And I thought too, just in that question that I had put in relation to that right of appeal, that it's not doing away the right of appeal altogether, and yet that was very often been given the impression, that in other areas that if one has to appeal, they can do, but not on the basis of coronavirus.
For information, to be fair, I think the bill is clear. It's coronavirus. It says that, but the committee could write to the department and just get them to say that when they come along next week, to be absolutely, I think it is clear. I don't think avian flu would be in it, as had been suggested there. It's coronavirus, not avian flu or anything else.
So the department's coming next week on this?
Yes.
So we would need to get them responses, obviously, in advance.
Indeed, so I'll write to them today, but sort of further, just a couple of other things to make sure members are happy, Chair. Is that we've got to number 3. Number 4 then would be just to ask the department to give the committee some clarity about how they will decide what is or what isn't a COVID grounds. Because some of them are really clear, some of them less so, that there are other bigger economic things happening. Fifthly then, to just suggest that the department improves its communications around this, and also to provide additional information to the councils about how the 250 million was calculated, because the NILGA or SOLACE said that they weren't clear on where that number had come from. Then additionally, perhaps ask for an update on the level of appeals, because we've heard various numbers there, and that's not what the department had said before. I believe, sorry, to be clear, I'm not casting aspersions on the department. I think maybe the witnesses might have got their wires crossed, and it would be maybe handy to get the bottom of it. And then, okay, so it's up to members whether you include this or not. Perhaps ask for the department's commentary as to whether the bill might be amended in order to include previous support, so things like the rates holiday and the other NAV schemes that the fairly generous NAV schemes that are surrounded COVID, that whether those might be taken into account, so that instead of taking out the appeal completely, you would allow appeals in certain cases but not in others, so that if you had been the beneficiary of some of these fairly generous schemes, you then wouldn't have the option of appealing your rates on the basis of COVID. So it's just to see what the department would say to that. Maybe it's impractical, maybe it's not, and just see what they say. So if members are happy for me to write to the department in those terms, basically asking for loads of information, lots of assurances. The idea, Chair, would be the committee will meet next week, an additional meeting again. Now, I had booked that in for Tuesday, but I think Tuesday there are some big stuff at plenary, abortion bill and other things that maybe, because I know Ms Dolan's on the Justice Committee, might have wanted to speak in that. Maybe Mr Wells, Mr Ulster may want to speak in that too. Would Monday suit better, is my question. If there's a lot of health regulations in plenary on Monday, very important, I'm sure, but I think you could probably be able to step in and step out more readily than if there's lots of different, very important bits of business. So, members, Monday or Tuesday?
Chair, could we not do it Tuesday lunchtime when we actually have 1 to 2, no?
I think it'll take us a while, and also we've tried this.
Okay.
There's a lot of other committees who are meeting and they've taken all the good slots, because I wanted Tuesday afternoon, it's far handier.
Yeah.
There were various, like Tuesday morning I think I wanted, but couldn't get that. They've snaffled those already. So it's either the Tuesday afternoon, which we've booked, or Monday afternoon. So what's your preference?
Are we content making this call based on our numbers?
Can you come?
We've only 4 of us.
I know.
And are we happy making the call? Well, first of all, do you want to close that out?
Yeah, sorry.
Are we happy enough for that correspondence going to
Yeah.
And we're happy. Can we make that call?
Yes, you can actually, because
Jim, happy enough with that?
Philip has...
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
And Jim is carrying Jim Ulster's as well, so we are.
So we're happy enough to get that correspondence first of all. So now the next meeting's either we're obviously going to meet on Wednesday, as normal coming. So it's either next Monday or next Tuesday for that other additional.
Tell you what, members, can you let me know soon, so that I can line up the witnesses for next week?
Peter, could you send me a copy of what it is that you sent into finance?
I'll send it around all members. Yes.
Thanks.
So that and hopefully that will be enough time for them to answer.
I'm content either day for Monday or Tuesday, so whatever.
So,
yeah, if you can't get a better time, then it doesn't matter what day.
Okay, I appreciate it, members. I do appreciate you showing up.
How you look at them.
Yeah, just as long as you don't mind us running in and out. So.
I think you're voting. So,
Yes.
the vote. Are you content to close?
Yes. So no other business members. No. Happy enough. And then we've discussed.
Brilliant timing.
We've discussed Wednesday's meeting at 2 o'clock, and then either Monday or Tuesday next week. So
probably Monday, whatever.
So
text you.
Thank you very much, members.
I'll go to the Monday too. So.
I'll adjourn the meeting. All right.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, members.
This